My wife said, "My ex-lover is joining us for Christmas dinner. Be mature about it." I nodded, of course. What she didn't know was that I invited her ex's fiancé too. The dinner table turned into a scene nobody in my family will ever forget. Look, I'm gonna be real with you right from the jump. I'm not some hero in this story. I'm just a regular dude who thought he had life figured out, you know? I had a decent job that didn't make me want to throw myself into traffic every Monday morning. A wife who I genuinely loved, spoiler alert. Hold that thought. And a solid collection of vinyl records that I'd been building since college because apparently I'm pretentious like that. Wednesday nights were my favorite because that's when I'd cook dinner. Nothing fancy, just good old-fashioned comfort food that reminded me I was an actual functioning adult and not some overgrown kid eating cereal for every meal like I did in my early 20s. So there I was, standing in our kitchen that we'd renovated last spring after watching way too many HGTV shows, stirring a pot of spaghetti like some kind of domestic god. The pasta was doing that thing where it's perfectly al dente. The sauce was bubbling away with just the right amount of garlic. Because let's be honest, there's no such thing as too much garlic. And Mariah Carey was belting out, "All I Want for Christmas Is You" from the speaker on the counter. I was humming along, completely off-key, but not giving a single damn because nobody was judging me. Or so I thought. The kitchen smelled incredible, like basil and tomatoes and those Italian dreams you have after watching too many Sopranos episodes. I was in my zone, my safe space, my little bubble of, hey, maybe adulthood isn't the absolute dumpster fire everyone said it would be. Lydia was sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling with the kind of intensity that suggested she was either reading something deeply important or stalking her high school friends to see who got fat. Her blonde hair was pulled back in one of those messy buns that somehow looked effortlessly perfect, and she was wearing my old college sweatshirt that she'd basically stolen from my closet 3 years ago and never returned. We'd been married for 5 years at this point, together for 7, and I thought we were solid. Like, gonna grow old together and argue about thermostat settings, kind of solid. Sure, we had our moments. Every couple does, but nothing that made me think our relationship was circling the drain or anything. Then she dropped the bomb, just casually, like she was commenting on the weather or asking me to pick up milk on the way home. So, my ex-lover, Adrian, is joining us for Christmas dinner. Be mature about it. I'm gonna need you to understand something here. Time literally stopped. Like, I'm talking full-on movie moment where everything goes into slow motion and you can hear your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. The wooden spoon I was holding froze mid-stir, and I swear the spaghetti noodles were clinging to it like they knew something terrible had just happened, and they were holding on for dear life. Mariah was still singing about Christmas, completely oblivious to the fact that my world was currently imploding in a suburban kitchen that still had a mortgage. I turned around slowly, probably looking like some kind of confused owl, and I just stared at her. She wasn't even looking up from her phone, just sitting there, scrolling away, like she'd just told me she was thinking about getting bangs or something equally mundane. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to process information, but all the circuits are firing wrong, like when you accidentally put aluminum foil in the microwave and everything just starts sparking and making weird noises. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice coming out way calmer than I felt inside. "Could you repeat that? Because I think I just had a minor stroke and my ears stopped working properly." She looked up then, gave me this little smile that I'd usually find cute, but in that moment made me want to launch myself into the sun, and repeated it. Word for word. "Adrian is joining us for Christmas dinner. My ex. I invited him. Be mature about it." There it was again. Be mature about it. Like she was asking me to be cool about her choosing a different Netflix show or something. Not inviting the dude she used to bang to my parents' house for the most important family dinner of the year. I stood there, sauce starting to burn on the stove because I'd completely forgotten about it, trying to figure out if this was real life or if I'd somehow fallen into an alternate dimension where spouses just casually invited their exes to family gatherings and expected their partners to throw confetti and celebrate. Why? I finally managed to ask, turning down the heat on the stove before I burned down the house we were still paying for. "Why on God's green earth would you invite your ex-boyfriend to Christmas dinner? At my parents' house? Where my entire family will be." Lydia put her phone down. First time in 20 minutes, by the way, and gave me this look that was probably supposed to be sympathetic but came across more like I was a child who didn't understand basic arithmetic. He's going through a really tough time right now, Derek. He's lonely. He doesn't have family nearby, and I thought it would be nice to include him. It's the season of giving and goodwill toward men and all that, right? Oh, absolutely. The season of goodwill. How could I forget? Let's just invite every ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, and random person we've ever hooked up with to family dinner, because Jesus said to love thy neighbor, or whatever. Maybe we should invite her orthodontist from middle school too. Really make it a party. I took a deep breath, counted to 5 in my head like my therapist taught me during those anger management sessions I took after the incident with my boss. Long story, different disaster, and tried to approach this rationally. Lydia, honey, sweetheart, love of my life. Christmas dinner is at my parents' house. It's a family thing. You can't just invite random people, especially not people you used to sleep with. He's not random. She shot back, getting that defensive tone that usually meant this conversation was about to go sideways fast. We were together for 3 years. He's important to me. And it's not like I'm still in love with him or anything. I just want to help a friend out during the holidays. A friend? Sure. Because everyone stays super close friends with their exes and thinks about them enough to invite them to intimate family gatherings. That's totally normal and not at all a giant red flag the size of Texas. Here's where it got really good, though. I asked her the obvious question. Did you at least ask my mom if this was okay? Since it's, her house and her dinner that she's been planning for 2 months? Lydia smiled. Actually smiled. Like she'd just won some kind of prize. I did actually. I called her this morning. She said it was fine and that we should all be more welcoming and charitable during the holidays. And that was the part that absolutely destroyed me. Not the fact that she'd invited Adrian. Not even the sheer audacity of thinking this was remotely appropriate. No, what really twisted the knife was that she'd gone behind my back, called my own mother, and gotten approval before even mentioning it to me. My own mom had conspired against me. The woman who gave birth to me, raised me, kissed my scraped knees, and taught me how to ride a bike had sided with my wife on the absolutely insane decision to invite her ex-lover to our family Christmas dinner. I stood there in that kitchen, sauce now definitely burning despite my best efforts, Mariah Carey mocking me with her joy and cheer, and I realized something important. I was married to someone who thought this was okay. Someone who valued her ex-boyfriend's feelings over her husband's comfort. Someone who went behind my back to my own mother to get permission for something that should have never even been a question. So I did what any mature, rational adult would do in this situation. I smiled. A big, bright, totally fake smile that probably made me look like a serial killer, but whatever. I turned off the stove, walked over to her, put my hand on her shoulder, and said in the sweetest voice I could muster, "Of course, honey. You're absolutely right. I'll be completely mature about it. Adrian is more than welcome at Christmas dinner." She looked relieved. Actually relieved. Like she'd been worried I might object or cause problems, or, I don't know, act like a normal human being who has boundaries and self-respect. "Thank you," she said, squeezing my hand. "I knew you'd understand. This is why I love you. You're so emotionally evolved." Emotionally evolved. That's what she called it. I nodded, kept smiling, and went back to the stove to salvage what was left of dinner. But inside, the gears were already turning. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being mature. Sometimes being mature means playing the long game. Sometimes it means smiling and nodding while you're secretly planning the most epic, karma-filled holiday surprise since Scrooge got visited by 3 ghosts. Spoiler alert. I was about to be very, very mature about this whole situation. The most mature I'd ever been in my entire life. So mature that people would write legends about my maturity. Christmas card-worthy maturity. I just needed to do a little research first. So here's the thing about trying to fall asleep when your wife has just casually dropped a nuclear bomb on your marriage. It's basically impossible. I'm talking full-on staring at the ceiling like it's gonna suddenly reveal the meaning of life, or at least explain what the hell just happened in my kitchen 3 hours ago. Lydia was beside me, sleeping like an actual baby, breathing all peaceful and steady like she hadn't just invited her ex-lover to Christmas dinner and completely obliterated my sense of reality. Meanwhile, I was lying there doing mental gymnastics, trying to figure out if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate universe where this kind of behavior was considered normal and acceptable. The bedroom was dark except for the little bit of streetlight creeping through the curtains, And I could hear our neighbor's dog barking at absolutely nothing, because that's what dogs do at midnight. They bark at ghosts or leaves, or their own existential dread, who knows. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, analyzing every word, every facial expression, trying to find the moment where things went sideways. Was it when she called my mom behind my back? Was it when she smiled like she'd done something thoughtful instead of completely insane? Or was it the part where she told me to be mature about it, like I was some kind of toddler who needed a lesson in sharing? Around midnight, after counting approximately 8 million ceiling tiles and contemplating every life choice I'd made since middle school, I gave up on sleep entirely. The curiosity was eating me alive, like some kind of parasite that feeds on your peace of mind and replaces it with paranoia and conspiracy theories. I needed answers. I needed to know what the hell was really going on here, because my gut, that trusty internal alarm system that had saved me from bad decisions more times than I could count, was screaming that something was seriously wrong with this whole situation. I turned my head slightly and looked at Lydia, still sleeping peacefully, her phone sitting right there on the nightstand like a little treasure chest full of secrets. Now, I know what you're thinking. Derek, don't do it, man. That's a violation of privacy. That's crossing a line you can't uncross. And you're absolutely right. Under normal circumstances, I would never, ever go through my wife's phone. I'm not that guy. I believe in trust and respect and all those relationship fundamentals that therapists talk about on podcasts. But here's the thing. These were not normal circumstances. These were my wife invited her ex-boyfriend to Christmas dinner, and I'm pretty sure I'm being gaslit circumstances, which I'm pretty confident fall under the exception clause of the relationship rulebook. So I did it. I reached over, moving as slowly as a sloth on sedatives, because the last thing I needed was for her to wake up and catch me mid-investigation, and I grabbed her phone. My heart was pounding like I was defusing a bomb in an action movie, and my hands were actually shaking a little bit, which was ridiculous because this was my wife, not some stranger. I knew her passcode, 1-2-3-4, because apparently she had the cybersecurity awareness of a potato, and I unlocked that phone faster than you can say trust issues. The screen lit up, temporarily blinding me like I'd just stared directly into the sun, and I quickly turned down the brightness before I woke up the entire neighborhood with my nuclear-powered investigation light. I went straight to her messages, scrolling past the usual stuff, group chats with her work friends complaining about their boss, texts from her sister about some Netflix show, a reminder from her dentist about a cleaning appointment. Normal stuff. Boring stuff. The kind of stuff that makes you feel guilty for snooping because maybe you're just being paranoid and everything is actually fine. Then I found it. The chat with Adrian. And let me tell you, it was like opening Pandora's box, except instead of releasing all the evils into the world, it just released all the confirmation of my worst fears directly into my brain. I started scrolling up, going back through weeks of messages, and holy mother of red flags, it was bad. Like, emotional affair that's definitely headed toward physical territory bad. The messages weren't explicitly sexual or anything. Lydia's too smart for that. She knows how to cover her tracks. But they were intimate in that way that's somehow worse than just hooking up. It was all feelings and memories, and what-if conversations that made my stomach twist into knots. Adrian had written, I miss what we had. Things were so simple back then, you know? We just got each other. And Lydia, my wife, the woman who promised to forsake all others when we stood at that altar 5 years ago, had responded, I know. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we tried harder. If we'd been more mature back then. Tried harder. Tried harder. Lady, you can't even open a jar of pickles without calling me into the kitchen like I'm some kind of emergency jar opening service. And you're sitting here wondering what would have happened if you tried harder with your ex? The audacity. The sheer, unfiltered audacity of this woman was actually impressive in a horrifying sort of way. I kept scrolling, my detective hat firmly in place, and it just got worse. There were messages about how she felt stuck sometimes. How she wondered if she'd settled down too fast, how Adrian really understood her, in ways that apparently I didn't despite literally living with her and doing her laundry and listening to her complain about her coworkers for 5 straight years. There were inside jokes and references to their past relationship, little heart emojis that made me want to throw the phone across the room, and worst of all, there were messages about Christmas dinner. Adrian, are you sure your husband's gonna be cool with me being there? Seems kinda weird. No offense. Lydia, Derek's really mature and understanding. He won't make it weird. Plus, my mother-in-law already said yes, so it's happening. I really want you there. She really wanted him there. Not, I felt bad for you being alone, or it seemed like the charitable thing to do. No, she wanted him there. At my parents' house. At our family Christmas dinner. This wasn't about charity or holiday spirit or any of that nonsense she'd sold me earlier. This was about her wanting to see her ex-boyfriend, wanting to have him in her life, wanting to keep that door open for whatever future possibilities her mind was cooking up. My hands were shaking for real now, not from nervousness, but from pure, unfiltered rage mixed with heartbreak and a dash of, I can't believe this is actually happening to me. I was that guy now. The guy whose wife is emotionally cheating. The guy who has to snoop through phones at midnight because his reality has become a Jerry Springer episode. The guy who's getting played in his own marriage. But here's where I surprised myself. Instead of waking her up right then and there, instead of starting a screaming match at 12:30 in the morning that would definitely result in the neighbors calling the cops, I did something way smarter. I took screenshots. Lots of them. Every incriminating message, every flirty exchange, every single piece of evidence that proved this wasn't just about helping out a friend during the holidays. I was moving through that phone like the FBI during a raid, like a caffeinated investigator with a vendetta and a smartphone. Screenshot, screenshot, screenshot. I sent them all to my own phone, watching each message whoosh through the digital universe and land safely in my text messages. Evidence secured. Case building. Revenge brewing. I was half detective, half heartbroken, and half completely done with this nonsense. Yes, that's 3 halves. Math doesn't matter when your life is falling apart. By the time I was done, I had approximately 40 screenshots documenting weeks of emotional infidelity. I carefully placed her phone back on the nightstand, exactly where it had been, screen facing down just like she'd left it. Then I lay back down, staring at that same ceiling, but this time with a completely different mindset. I wasn't sad anymore. Don't get me wrong. Part of me was absolutely devastated. The part that had loved this woman, that had built a life with her, that had imagined growing old together and arguing about which retirement home had the best shuffleboard courts. That part was shattered into about 8 million pieces. But the dominant emotion, the one that was drowning out everything else, was something else entirely. It was strategic. It was calculated. It was the feeling you get when you're about to flip the script on someone who thought they were playing you. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be mature in the way she expected. You know, the doormat kind of mature where I smile and nod while she parades her ex around my family like some kind of emotional support peacock. No, I was going to be mature in a different way. The kind of mature that involves careful planning, perfect timing, and making absolutely sure that when the truth comes out, it comes out in the most spectacular, karma-filled way possible. Lydia wanted Adrian at Christmas dinner? Fine. He could come. But he wasn't going to be the only surprise guest at that party. Because by morning, I wasn't sad Derek anymore, the confused husband wondering what he did wrong. I was strategic Derek, the man with a plan and 40 screenshots worth of ammunition. Game on. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of purpose usually reserved for people training for marathons or planning military coups. Lydia had already left for work, some early morning meeting that she'd mentioned last week, but that I'd completely tuned out because apparently my subconscious knew she wasn't worth my full attention anymore. I made myself a pot of coffee so strong it could probably strip paint off walls, sat down at my laptop, and became what I can only describe as a digital stalker with a righteous cause. First order of business. Figure out who the hell Adrian actually was beyond just Lydia's ex-boyfriend who's apparently having a rough time. Because here's the thing about people who claim they're going through something difficult. 9 times out of 10, they're either lying, exaggerating, or they cause their own problems and want sympathy for it. I had a feeling Adrian fell into at least 2 of those categories, possibly all 3 if I was lucky. I started with the basics. Facebook, because apparently people still use that dinosaur of a social media platform to document their entire lives for their aunt's friends to comment on. I typed in Adrian, plus the last name I remembered Lydia mentioning once or twice in the early days of our relationship, when she was still being honest about her past. Adrian Kershaw sounded like a name that belonged to either a British poet or a guy who wears too much cologne and calls women females. I was betting on the latter. His Facebook profile popped up immediately because the dude had his privacy settings looser than a gas station hot dog that's been sitting under the heat lamp since Tuesday. And what do you know? His relationship status was right there at the top of his page, bold as day. Engaged to Clara Mills. Engaged. Engaged. This man was engaged to be married, and he was out here texting my wife about missing what they had and wondering what could have been. The rough time he was supposedly going through wasn't some tragic loss or career setback or health crisis. No, the rough time was probably just the normal stress of wedding planning mixed with the fact that he was apparently a dirtbag who couldn't let go of his ex-girlfriend even though he was literally promising to spend the rest of his life with someone else. I sat back in my chair, took a long sip of my nuclear coffee, and let this information sink in. Adrian wasn't some lonely, pathetic guy who needed the warmth of human connection during the holidays. He was an engaged man who was emotionally cheating on his fiancée, while my wife emotionally cheated on me with him. It was like a cheating inception, a betrayal turducken. And somehow, neither of them thought this was a problem worth mentioning. But wait, it gets better. I clicked on Clara's profile next, because if I was going down this rabbit hole, I was going all the way to Wonderland. Her page was exactly what you'd expect from someone who probably had no idea her fiancé was a walking red flag factory. Her profile picture showed a woman with kind eyes, a genuine smile, and the kind of wholesome energy that made you think she probably volunteered at animal shelters on weekends and sent birthday cards to her grandmother. She looked way too nice to be caught up in this absolute dumpster fire of a situation. I scrolled through her photos, pictures of her and Adrian at various events, looking happy and couple Y, doing that thing where they both tilt their heads the same direction for photos like they practiced it in a mirror. There were engagement pictures from what looked like 3 months ago, taken at some park with fall leaves and golden hour lighting, the kind of photos you'd see in a wedding magazine. Clara was holding up her hand showing off the ring. Adrian was kissing her cheek, and the caption said something about "can't wait to marry my best friend," with approximately 40 heart emojis. Her Instagram was even more wholesome. Lots of inspirational quotes about love and trust, pictures of coffee cups and sunsets, a few workout selfies with captions about self-care and personal growth. There were posts about wedding planning, asking her followers for advice on centerpieces and whether she should do a live band or a DJ. This woman was actively planning her wedding to a man who was simultaneously planning to spend Christmas dinner with his ex-girlfriend at her husband's parents' house. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at said Christmas dinner. I felt something I didn't expect in that moment. Genuine sympathy for Clara. She was over here, living her life, planning her wedding, posting about table settings and dress fittings, completely oblivious to the fact that her fiancé was a lying scumbag. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve to be the other woman who didn't even know she was the other woman. And honestly, she deserved to know the truth just as much as I deserved to blow this whole thing wide open. So I did something that was either absolutely brilliant or completely insane, depending on how you look at it. I created a burner Instagram account. Not with my name. Obviously, I'm not an idiot. I called it Holiday Concern Guy, because subtlety is important when you're about to drop a truth bomb on a stranger's life. I used some random stock photo of a Christmas tree as the profile picture, wrote a bio that said, "Just trying to spread truth this holiday season." And then I sat there for about 10 minutes crafting the perfect message. It needed to be informative, but not aggressive. Honest, but not cruel. The kind of message that would make her pay attention without making her think I was some crazy stalker who got off on ruining people's holidays. After about 7 drafts, I finally settled on this. "Hey Clara, I know this is going to sound weird, and I'm sorry to message you out of the blue, but I thought you should know something. Your fiancé's ex-girlfriend invited him to Christmas dinner at her husband's parents' house. That husband is me. His name is Derek, and I only found out about this a couple days ago. Adrian told my wife he was going through a rough time, and she felt bad for him. I'm guessing he didn't tell you about this dinner? Anyway, I thought you deserved to know. Merry Christmas, and I'm really sorry you got dragged into this mess." I read it over about 15 times, checking for typos and making sure it hit the right tone. Then, before I could chicken out or overthink it even more, I hit send. The message whooshed away into the digital void, and I sat there staring at my screen like I was waiting for test results from a doctor. For about 45 minutes, nothing happened. I started second-guessing myself. wondering if maybe I'd crossed a line or if Clara would just block me and write me off as some weirdo. I made another pot of coffee, less nuclear this time because my hands were already shaking from caffeine and adrenaline, and tried to distract myself by pretending to work on some reports I was supposed to finish by Friday. Then my phone buzzed. Instagram notification. Clara had responded. My heart actually skipped a beat. I'm not being dramatic. I felt that thing do a little stuttery jump in my chest like it forgot how to work for a second. I opened the message, and what I saw made me want to simultaneously high-five myself and pour one out for this poor woman. Are you serious right now? Adrian told me he had a work party that night. A work party. He said it was mandatory and that he'd probably be out late because his boss was hosting it at his house. I thought it was weird that a work party was on Christmas, but he said his boss was Jewish, so it wasn't a big deal for them. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't believe this. There it was. The confirmation I needed. Adrian had straight up lied to his fiancée about where he was going to be on Christmas. Not just a little white lie, but a fully constructed, detailed fabrication complete with a fake Jewish boss and everything. The audacity of this man was actually impressive in the worst possible way. I wrote back immediately. I'm dead serious. I have screenshots of the messages between him and my wife if you want to see them. They're not sexual or anything, but they're definitely inappropriate. Lots of I miss you, and what if we tried harder type stuff. I'm really sorry you're finding out this way. Her response came back in under 2 minutes. Yes. Send them. Please. I need to see everything. So I did. I sent her every single screenshot I'd taken the night before, each one a little nail in Adrian's coffin. I watched the receipt pop up and then disappear as she went through them, and I could only imagine what was going through her head. The betrayal, the anger, the feeling of being made a fool of by someone you trusted. We ended up messaging back and forth for about 30 minutes. Clara told me she'd been with Adrian for 2 years, engaged for 3 months, and planning a wedding for next October. She said she'd had some weird feelings about him lately. He'd been distant, on his phone a lot, making excuses to go out alone. But she'd written it off as wedding stress or work pressure. She never imagined he was still hung up on his ex. I told her about Lydia, about how she'd invited him behind my back, about how my own mother had approved it without talking to me first. We bonded over our shared experience of being with people who apparently didn't respect us enough to be honest. It was like the saddest support group ever, except it was just 2 strangers messaging on Instagram about their terrible significant others. Then Clara said something that made me grin like the Grinch planning to steal Christmas. You know what? If you're serious about all this, if this dinner is really happening, I want to come. I stared at that message for a solid 10 seconds, my brain doing calculations about how absolutely nuclear this could go. Then I wrote back. Are you sure? It's going to be messy. Like, potentially explosive. My whole family will be there. Her response was immediate. I'm sure. Adrian wants to play games? Let's play. Besides, I deserve to see the look on his face when he realizes he's been caught. I couldn't argue with that logic. In fact, I loved that logic. I loved it so much I wanted to frame it and hang it on my wall. So I told her, please do come. Bring wine. You're definitely going to need it. I'll text you the address and time. We exchanged actual phone numbers after that, moving the conversation off Instagram because at some point you have to upgrade from burner account messages to real communication. Clara seemed like a genuinely good person who'd been dealt a garbage hand by a garbage human. And me? I was starting to feel like maybe I wasn't the only victim here. Maybe this was bigger than just my marriage falling apart. Maybe this was about holding people accountable for their actions and making sure that lies don't get to masquerade as truth during what's supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year. Christmas dinner was going to be one for the books. The week leading up to Christmas was possibly the most surreal experience of my entire life, and I once accidentally walked into the women's bathroom at a movie theater and didn't realize it until I was washing my hands next to someone applying lipstick, so that's saying something. I had to live with Lydia, sleep next to her, have normal married people conversations with her, all while knowing that I was sitting on information that was going to detonate like a nuclear warhead at Christmas dinner. It was like being an undercover agent in my own house, except instead of gathering intelligence on foreign threats, I was just trying not to burst out laughing every time she mentioned how nice it was that Adrian could join us. Lydia was in full holiday mode, which apparently meant transforming our house into something that looked like a Christmas store had exploded inside it. There were decorations everywhere. garland on the staircase, lights around every window, a tree so big I'm pretty sure it violated some kind of building code. She spent her evenings baking cookies that filled the house with the smell of cinnamon and sugar, humming along to Christmas carols like she was auditioning for a Hallmark movie. She even broke out the fancy apron her grandmother had given her, the one with little reindeer on it that she only wore when she was feeling particularly domestic. The whole thing would have been adorable if it wasn't completely nauseating given the circumstances. She was playing house, pretending everything was perfect, living in this fantasy world where inviting your ex-boyfriend to your husband's family Christmas dinner was just a normal, charitable act of holiday kindness. Meanwhile, I was walking around with screenshots on my phone and a secret alliance with said ex-boyfriend's fiancé, counting down the days until the whole charade came crashing down like a gingerbread house in an earthquake. The really challenging part was keeping my cool. Every time Lydia mentioned Adrian, which was approximately 47 times a day, I had to bite my tongue so hard I'm surprised I didn't draw blood. She'd say things like, "I wonder if Adrian likes pecan pie or pumpkin pie better," or "I hope Adrian doesn't feel awkward being around your family," or my personal favorite, "It's so sweet that you're being so mature about this whole thing." That last one almost broke me. I had to leave the room and go stand in the garage for 5 minutes, taking deep breaths and reminding myself that revenge is a dish best served cold, preferably on Christmas with a side of public humiliation. I checked in with Clara almost daily, making sure she was still on board with the plan and hadn't backed out or decided this was all too crazy. But honestly, the more we talked, the more I realized she was just as invested in this as I was. She'd done her own digging after our initial conversation and had found even more evidence of Adrian's shoddiness. Apparently, he'd been staying late at work a lot recently, which Clara now realized were probably the nights he was texting Lydia. He'd also been weirdly protective of his phone, taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. Classic cheater behavior, the kind of stuff they probably teach in Infidelity 101. Clara sent me updates throughout the week, mostly just messages saying things like "still can't believe this is happening," or "found another lie. He said he was with his brother last Tuesday, but his brother was out of town." We were like two detectives comparing notes, except instead of solving a murder, we were just uncovering the fact that our significant others were terrible people. She told me she'd already picked out her outfit for Christmas dinner, a red sweater that she'd originally bought to wear to Adrian's office party, which was deliciously ironic. She was turning his lie into her power move, and I respected that immensely. The hardest part was dealing with my mom. She called me 3 times that week to talk about Christmas dinner preparations, and every single time she brought up Adrian like he was some kind of honored guest we should all be excited to meet. "Lydia tells me Adrian is such a nice young man," she said during one call, and I had to grip my phone so tight I nearly cracked the screen. "It's very charitable of you both to include him during the holidays. Your father and I raised you right." Oh, Mom. Sweet, naive mom who thought her son was being mature and charitable when really her son was orchestrating the most dramatic dinner party since the Last Supper. I wanted to tell her everything, to warn her that Christmas was going to be less silent night and more explosive night, but I kept my mouth shut. The surprise needed to be complete. Everyone needed to see this unfold in real time, without warning, without the ability to prepare or make excuses or try to smooth things over before the truth came out. My sister Jade called me too, mostly to complain about having to wrangle her twin boys for a formal dinner, but she also mentioned Adrian. "Mom says you're bringing Lydia's ex to Christmas? That's weird, right? Or am I being judgmental?" I told her she wasn't being judgmental, that it was definitely weird, but that I was trying to be the bigger person. She laughed and said, "You're a better man than Dad would have been. He would have lost his mind." Little did she know that I had absolutely lost my mind. I'd just lost it in a very calculated, strategic direction. At work, I was basically useless. I'd sit at my desk, staring at spreadsheets that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all the attention I was paying them. My coworker Brad asked me if I was feeling okay, because apparently I'd been smiling to myself randomly throughout the day like some kind of creep. I told him I was just excited for Christmas, which wasn't technically a lie. I was extremely excited for Christmas, just not for the reasons he thought. Every night, I'd come home to Lydia being aggressively cheerful and domestic. She'd greet me at the door with a kiss on the cheek, ask about my day, serve dinner that she'd actually cooked instead of ordering takeout like we usually did. It was like she was overcompensating, trying extra hard to be the perfect wife, probably because some part of her guilty conscience was screaming at her that she was doing something wrong. But she'd push that feeling down, rationalize it away, tell herself that she was just being a good person who was helping out a friend. The texts between her and Adrian continued, of course. I checked her phone every night after she fell asleep, watching their messages like they were episodes of the world's worst TV show. They'd talk about Christmas dinner, about how excited they were to see each other, about how nice it would be to catch up in person. Adrian would say things like, "Can't wait to see you," and Lydia would respond with smiley faces and hearts. Not, "I love you," hearts, or anything that explicit. She was still smart enough to maintain plausible deniability, but the kind of hearts that definitely meant more than just friendship. I screenshot everything, building my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. Clara was doing the same thing on her end, documenting every lie Adrian told her about his whereabouts and his plans. We'd compare notes, share our findings, and basically become the world's most depressing pen pals. But there was something empowering about it too, about knowing that we weren't going to be victims here. We were going to be the ones who pulled back the curtain and showed everyone who these people really were. The night before Christmas, Lydia was practically vibrating with excitement. She spent 3 hours getting everything ready for the next day, wrapping last-minute presents, laying out her outfit, making a checklist of things to bring to my parents' house. She was humming, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas," while she worked, completely oblivious to the fact that tomorrow was going to be anything but merry for her. I sat on the couch, watching her buzz around like a festive bee, and I felt this weird mix of emotions. Part of me was sad. This was my wife, someone I'd loved and built a life with, and I was watching that life crumble in real time. But the bigger part of me, the part that was currently winning the internal battle, was absolutely ready for justice. She'd made her choices. She'd lied, gone behind my back, prioritized her ex-boyfriend's feelings over her husband's dignity. And tomorrow, she was going to face the consequences of those choices in front of everyone who mattered. "Are you excited for tomorrow?" she asked me, plopping down on the couch next to me with a glass of wine, her cheeks flushed from running around all evening. I turned to her and smiled. That same smile I'd been perfecting all week. The one that looked genuine but was actually just a mask, covering the chaos underneath. "Absolutely," I said. "I think tomorrow's going to be unforgettable." "You're being so amazing about all this," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Seriously, Derek, not every husband would be this understanding. I'm really lucky to have you." I wrapped my arm around her, still smiling, and said, "Don't mention it. I'm just trying to be mature about the whole thing." Mature. That word again. It had become my mantra, my catchphrase, my inside joke with myself. Every time someone said I was being mature, I wanted to laugh hysterically because they had no idea what kind of mature I was actually being. I wasn't being doormat mature or pushover mature. I was being chess player mature, strategic mature, long game mature, the kind of mature that waits for exactly the right moment to flip the board and watch all the pieces scatter. That night, I barely slept again. Not from anxiety this time, but from anticipation. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow was showtime. Tomorrow was the day that Adrian and Lydia's little fantasy world came crashing down, and I was going to have a front row seat to the whole thing. Actually, forget front row seat. I was the director, the producer, and the guy selling popcorn in the lobby. Clara texted me at around midnight. "Still good for tomorrow?" "I'm nervous, but ready." I texted back, "Still good. See you at 2:45. This is going to be legendary." And honestly, I believed it. Because if there's one thing I'd learned over the past week of pretending everything was fine while secretly planning the most dramatic Christmas dinner in the history of awkward family gatherings, it's that being mature doesn't mean being passive. Sometimes being mature means standing up for yourself. Sometimes it means holding people accountable. And sometimes, just sometimes, it means orchestrating the perfect moment of truth with the precision of a Swiss watch and the drama of a soap opera finale. Merry Christmas to me. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe in divine intervention or at least really good luck. The sky was clear and blue, the sun was shining but not too hot, and there was just enough of a breeze to make it feel like an actual holiday instead of just another day in suburban America where everyone pretends to like each other for the sake of tradition. I woke up around 7, looked over at Lydia still sleeping peacefully like she wasn't about to have the worst Christmas of her entire life, and I felt this surge of energy that I can only describe as pure, unfiltered anticipation mixed with a healthy dose of vindication. We got to my parents' house around noon, our car loaded down with presents and the fancy desserts Lydia had spent all week making. My childhood home looked exactly like it always did during the holidays. Lights strung up along the roof that my dad had definitely complained about hanging, but secretly loved. A wreath on the front door that was slightly crooked because my mom insisted on doing it herself. And the sound of chaos already emanating from inside, because apparently my sister's twins had arrived early and were already tearing through the place like tiny, adorable tornadoes. Walking through that front door felt like entering a time capsule. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing and all those carbs that you pretend you're not going to eat too much of, but absolutely will. My mom had outdone herself with the decorations. There were garlands everywhere, candles on every surface that wasn't occupied by food, and a Christmas tree in the living room that was so covered in ornaments you could barely see the actual tree underneath. It was excessive and over the top and absolutely perfect, which pretty much summed up my mom's approach to everything in life. Derek. Lydia. My mom appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron that said Santa's favorite chef and wielding a wooden spoon like a weapon. She pulled both of us into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and wine, which meant she'd already been taste testing her cooking for quality control purposes. I'm so glad you're here. The turkey is taking forever. Your father has already had 3 glasses of whiskey, even though I told him to pace himself. And your sister's boys just knocked over a lamp, but it didn't break, so we're calling it a Christmas miracle. This was exactly the kind of controlled chaos I'd grown up with, and normally it would have made me smile with genuine warmth. But today, knowing what was coming, it felt more like the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. I was about to turn this Norman Rockwell painting into a Jackson Pollock splatter piece, and part of me felt guilty about it, but only a very small part. The rest of me was ready to watch this whole thing burn in the most spectacular way possible. My dad was in the living room, planted in his recliner like he'd been surgically attached to it, watching football with the volume way too loud because he refused to admit his hearing wasn't what it used to be. He raised his glass of whiskey in greeting when he saw me, already looking happy and buzzed in that way that suggested he'd started drinking around 10 in the morning. Derek, come test this whiskey with me. Your mother says I'm drinking too much, but I say it's Christmas and Jesus would want me to be happy. I'm 99% sure that's not how theology works, but I wasn't about to argue with my dad's Christmas logic. I poured myself a drink. I was definitely going to need it, and sat down with him for a few minutes, watching grown men chase a ball around a field while commentators talked about it like it was a matter of national security. My sister Jade appeared shortly after, looking exhausted in that special way that only parents of young children can achieve. Her hair was in a messy ponytail. She had what looked like jelly stains on her shirt, and her eyes had that 1,000-yard stare that suggested she'd been up since 5 in the morning dealing with twins hopped up on Christmas excitement and sugar. Derek, thank God you're here. Please tell me you brought alcohol stronger than wine, because I'm going to need it to survive today. If only she knew that the alcohol wasn't for surviving the twins. It was going to be for surviving the dinner theater production I was about to stage in approximately 2 hours. But I just smiled and told her there was plenty of whiskey, and she should definitely help herself. Lydia was in the kitchen with my mom, doing that thing where women bond over cooking and gossip. I could hear them laughing about something, probably some story my mom was telling about my dad's latest DIY project that had gone horribly wrong. Lydia looked completely at ease, comfortable, like she belonged here. Like she wasn't about to get exposed as a lying, manipulative person who'd invited her ex-boyfriend to her husband's family dinner while carrying on an emotional affair behind everyone's backs. The next hour passed in a blur of typical Christmas activities. The twins opened some presents early because they couldn't wait, and my sister had given up on discipline hours ago. My dad alternated between watching football and supervising the turkey, which really just meant opening the oven every 10 minutes to stare at it and declare it not ready yet. My mom stressed about side dishes and whether she'd made enough food, even though she'd made enough to feed a small army, and we all knew there would be leftovers for weeks. And me? I was checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for Clara's text confirming she was on her way. I told her to arrive around 2:45, which would give Adrian just enough time to get comfortable and let his guard down before the hammer dropped. The plan was simple but effective. Let Adrian arrive. Let everyone meet him and welcome him. Let Lydia feel good about her charitable decision. And then, boom, Clara walks in and the whole house of cards collapses. At 2:15, right on schedule, the doorbell rang. My mom literally squealed with excitement, which was slightly disturbing but also very on-brand for her. That must be Adrian. Oh, I'm so excited to meet him. Lydia's told me so much about what a nice young man he is. I watched Lydia's face light up like someone had plugged her into an electrical socket. She practically ran to the door, smoothing down her dress and checking her hair in the hallway mirror before opening it. And there he was, Adrian Kershaw, in the flesh, looking exactly like the kind of guy who would pull this kind of nonsense. He was tall, I'll give him that, with dark hair styled in that. I woke up like this, but actually spent 20 minutes on it. Way that guys do when they're trying too hard. He was wearing a navy blue sweater that probably cost more than my car payment, and holding a bottle of wine that definitely cost more than my car payment. He had that confident, charming smile that probably worked on most people, the kind of smile that said, I'm a good guy, you can trust me, while simultaneously being completely untrustworthy. Adrian, come in, come in. Lydia pulled him into a hug that lasted approximately 4 seconds too long to be appropriate for someone who was just a friend. I watched from my position in the living room, drink in hand, smile plastered on my face, looking like the world's most understanding husband while internally, I was counting down the minutes until this whole charade exploded. Adrian came in, bringing with him a wave of expensive cologne that probably had a name like deception or betrayal or something equally ironic. He handed the wine to my mom, who accepted it like he'd just gifted her the Holy Grail, and then he made his rounds shaking hands and introducing himself to everyone. He had this whole routine down. Firm handshake, eye contact, self-deprecating humor about how he hoped he wasn't intruding on family time. It was a performance, and honestly, it was pretty good. I could see why Lydia had fallen for this guy originally, and why she was apparently still hung up on him. When he got to me, he extended his hand with that same confident smile. Derek, right? Man, I really appreciate you being cool with me crashing your family Christmas. Lydia told me you're a really understanding guy. I shook his hand, probably gripping it a little harder than necessary, and smiled right back at him. Of course, Adrian. Any friend of Lydia's is welcome here. I'm all about being mature and understanding. I put just enough emphasis on the word mature that only I would catch it, a little inside joke with myself about what was coming. My dad got Adrian a drink. My mom went back to fussing over the turkey, and everyone settled into that pre-dinner mingling phase where people stand around making small talk and pretending they're not just waiting to eat. Adrian and Lydia gravitated toward each other naturally, standing just a little too close, laughing just a little too loud at each other's jokes. My sister noticed it too. I caught her giving me a questioning look from across the room. Like, is this weird, or is it just me? I gave her a subtle nod that said, oh, it's definitely weird, just wait. Adrian was working the room like a politician at a fundraiser, charming my mom with compliments about her decorating, bonding with my dad over some sports team they both apparently followed, even getting down on the floor to play with my sister's twins for a minute to show what a great guy he was. And through it all, Lydia was watching him with this look in her eyes that made my stomach turn. It was admiration mixed with nostalgia, mixed with something that definitely wasn't appropriate for a married woman looking at her ex-boyfriend. 2:30 came and went. 2:40 arrived. I checked my phone again. Clara had texted 15 minutes ago saying she was 10 minutes away and asking if I was sure about this. I'd responded with absolutely sure. See you soon. Now it was just a waiting game, watching the clock tick down to the moment when Christmas dinner turned into Christmas drama. At 2:43, my mom announced that dinner would be ready in about 15 minutes and everyone should start thinking about sitting down. People began migrating toward the dining room, where my mom had set up the table like we were hosting a presidential banquet. There were place cards, fancy napkins folded into shapes I couldn't identify, enough silverware to confuse an etiquette expert, and a centerpiece that probably violated some fire codes with the number of candles involved. Adrian and Lydia were laughing about something together near the window, completely in their own little world, when I heard it, the sound I'd been waiting for. The doorbell. That simple ding-dong that was about to change everything. The room got quiet for a second, everyone looking around in confusion because we weren't expecting anyone else. My mom glanced at my dad, who shrugged. My sister looked at me with raised eyebrows. Lydia and Adrian's laughter died off, both of them looking toward the door with mild curiosity. "I'll get it," I said, setting down my drink and standing up with the kind of calm purpose that suggested I knew exactly who was on the other side of that door. Because I did. I absolutely did. I walked to the front door, very aware that everyone was watching me, probably wondering who could possibly be arriving this late to Christmas dinner. I took a deep breath, put my hand on the doorknob, and opened it with a smile that was probably a little too eager given the circumstances. There she was, Clara Mills. Red sweater, nervous smile, clutching a bottle of wine like it was emotional support, looking both terrified and determined in equal measure. Standing there in the doorway, looking at Clara's face, I had this weird moment of clarity where I realized there was no going back from this. Once she stepped through that door, once she entered my parents' house and everyone saw her, the dominoes would start falling and there would be no way to stop them. This was the point of no return, the moment where I either committed to blowing up my marriage in front of my entire family on Christmas Day, or I chickened out and sent Clara away and lived the rest of my life as the guy who let his wife walk all over him. And honestly, there was no universe where I was choosing option 2. "Clara," I said, loud enough that people inside could hear me, my voice warm and welcoming like she was an old friend I'd been expecting all along. "I'm so glad you could make it. Come on in." She stepped inside, and I could feel the shift in the room's energy immediately. It was like someone had pressed pause on a movie. Everyone just froze, mid-conversation, mid-movement, mid-everything. My mom was halfway to the kitchen with an empty serving dish. My dad had his whiskey glass raised to his lips, but hadn't taken the sip yet. My sister was bent down talking to one of the twins, but her head snapped up so fast I'm surprised she didn't get whiplash. And Lydia. Oh, Lydia's face was absolutely priceless. She went from happy and glowing to confused to horrified in about 2 seconds flat, like watching someone's soul leave their body in real time. But the real show was Adrian. This man, this smooth-talking, confident, charming man who'd been working the room like he owned the place, suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost. Actually, worse than a ghost. He looked like he'd seen his fiancée at his ex-girlfriend's husband's family Christmas dinner, which is exactly what was happening because that's exactly what she was. All the color drained from his face so fast I was genuinely concerned he might pass out right there on my parents' Persian rug that my mom was weirdly protective of. "Clara." Adrian's voice came out strangled, like someone was squeezing his throat. He actually took a step backward, bumping into the side table and nearly knocking over one of my mom's decorative candles. What are you doing here?" Clara, to her absolute credit, didn't falter. She stood there in her red sweater, holding that wine bottle, and smiled in a way that was equal parts sweet and terrifying. It was the smile of someone who had reached their limit and was now operating on pure adrenaline and righteous anger. "I was invited," she said, her voice steady and clear. Then she turned to me, her eyes showing just a flicker of appreciation. "By your ex-girlfriend's husband. Derek invited me." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a snowflake land outside. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I'm pretty sure time itself stopped for a solid 5 seconds while everyone's brains tried to process what was happening. My sister's mouth was literally hanging open. My dad had finally lowered his whiskey glass and was staring at the scene unfolding in front of him like it was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all year, which it probably was. My mom looked completely confused, her eyes darting between me, Clara, Adrian, and Lydia like she was watching a tennis match played by 4 people simultaneously. I took Clara's wine bottle and her coat, playing the perfect host, smiling like this was all completely normal and planned. "Everyone, this is Clara Mills. Clara, this is my family. My mom Susan, my dad Frank, my sister Jade, and her twins Tyler and Mason. And I believe you already know Adrian here. Know him?" Clara's voice had an edge to it now, that polite veneer starting to crack just a little. "I'm engaged to him. Or at least, I was until about 3 days ago when I found out he's been lying to me about where he'd be spending Christmas." You could have heard a pin drop in that moment. Actually, you could have heard a pin thinking about dropping. The silence was so thick and heavy it was almost a physical presence in the room. My mom made this little gasping sound, her hand flying to her chest like she was clutching pearls she wasn't actually wearing. My sister whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, but in the silence it sounded like she'd screamed it through a megaphone. Adrian finally found his voice, though it came out about 3 octaves higher than normal. "Clara, this isn't what it looks like. I can explain. This is just a misunderstanding." Really? Clara took a step further into the room, and I gotta say, watching her transform from nervous to confrontational was like watching a superhero origin story in real time. "You told me you were going to a work party. A mandatory work party at your Jewish boss's house, remember? You were very specific about the details, Adrian. So either you lied to me about this dinner, or you lied to these people about having a work party. Which is it?" Lydia finally unfroze, her face cycling through about 17 different emotions before settling on defensive anger. She turned to me, her eyes blazing, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and humiliation. "Derek, what the hell is this? How could you invite her here? To your parents' house? On Christmas?" I set Clara's wine bottle down on the entry table with exaggerated care, then turned to my wife with the calmest, most reasonable expression I could manage. Inside, I was doing cartwheels. Outside, I was the picture of mature rationality. I was just being mature about the situation, sweetheart. You know, like you asked me to be. When you invited your ex-boyfriend to my family's Christmas dinner without really discussing it with me first, I figured if we're welcoming old flames to family gatherings, we might as well make it fair and invite Adrian's current flame too. Equal opportunity holiday inclusion and all that. My dad made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh, quickly covering it by taking a long drink of his whiskey. My sister wasn't even trying to hide her reaction anymore. She had pulled out her phone and was definitely recording this, her eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing truly spectacular drama that doesn't directly involve you. This is completely different. Lydia's voice was getting higher, more desperate. She looked around the room like she was searching for allies, but everyone was just staring at her with various expressions of shock, confusion, and, in my dad's case, barely concealed amusement. Adrian was going through a hard time. I was trying to be charitable. Charitable. Clara laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd been pushed too far and was now done with everyone's nonsense. Is that what we're calling emotional affairs now? Charity work? Because I've seen the messages, Lydia. Derek sent me screenshots. All those "I miss you" and "what if we tried harder" texts. That's not charity. That's something else entirely. Adrian tried to approach Clara, his hands up in a placating gesture like he was trying to calm down a wild animal. "Clara, baby, please. Those messages were taken out of context. Lydia and I are just old friends catching up. There's nothing going on between us." "Then why did you lie to me about coming here?" Clara shot back, not backing down an inch. "If this was just innocent friend stuff, why make up an elaborate story about a work party? Why not just tell me the truth, that you were having Christmas dinner with your ex-girlfriend and her husband's family?" "Because I knew you'd overreact." Adrian's frustration was showing now, his careful charm cracking under pressure. "I knew you'd make it into something it wasn't." "Oh, I'm overreacting?" Clara's voice went up a notch. "You've been texting your ex about missing her and wondering about what could have been. You lied to me about your whereabouts on Christmas, and somehow I'm the one who's overreacting? That's rich, Adrian. That's really rich." My mom, who had been standing frozen in shock this entire time, finally found her voice. It came out small and confused, like a child trying to understand a complicated math problem. I don't understand what's happening. Susan, can someone explain what's happening?" My sister, bless her chaotic heart, stepped in to help. "Mom, apparently Lydia invited her ex-boyfriend to Christmas dinner, told Derek to be mature about it, but forgot to mention that said ex-boyfriend is engaged to someone else and has been having an emotional affair with Lydia. And Derek, being the absolute legend that he is, invited the fiancée to dinner too. So now we're all here together. It's like a Hallmark movie, but way more entertaining." "Jade," my mom looked scandalized, though I noticed she didn't actually disagree with the assessment. Lydia turned her fury on me again, tears starting to form in her eyes now. "You went through my phone. You invaded my privacy. That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," I said calmly, because I'd looked this up during one of my many sleepless nights this week. "We're married. Legally, There's no expectation of privacy between spouses regarding shared devices and accounts. But nice try with the deflection. Very mature of you. There was that word again. Mature. It was becoming my favorite weapon in this whole mess. Adrian and Lydia started talking over each other, both of them trying to explain and justify and rationalize what had been happening. Adrian insisted it was just friendship, that Clara was overreacting, that the messages didn't mean anything serious. Lydia claimed she was just being kind to someone going through a difficult time, that I was making it into something it wasn't, that I'd betrayed her trust by going through her phone. Their stories didn't match. Adrian's version contradicted Lydia's, and neither of them seemed to notice or care. They were too busy trying to save themselves to realize they were sinking each other's lifeboats. It was glorious. Absolutely, spectacularly glorious. This was better than any movie, any TV show, any piece of entertainment I'd ever witnessed. This was real-life karma playing out in real time, and I had orchestrated the whole thing. Clara watched them spiral with this expression of disgusted fascination, like she was watching a car crash in slow motion and couldn't look away. Finally, she'd had enough. She held up her hand, silencing both of them mid-excuse. You know what? I don't actually care about your explanations anymore. I don't care about the justifications or the excuses or whatever mental gymnastics you're both doing to make yourselves feel better about this. What I care about is that you're both liars. You lied to me, Adrian. You lied to Derek, Lydia. You lied to yourselves if you think this was ever going to end well. She took off her engagement ring, this beautiful, expensive-looking thing that probably cost more than my car, and held it up in the light for a second. Then she walked over to where Adrian was standing, dropped the ring into his hand like it was a piece of trash, and said with perfect, cold clarity, "We're done. Lose my number. Lose my address. Lose any memory you have of me, because I'm sure as hell going to forget you ever existed." Then she turned on her heel and walked straight toward the front door. But before she left, she stopped next to me, put her hand on my shoulder, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Thanks for inviting me, Derek. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Merry Christmas." And with that, Clara Mills walked out of my parents' house and out of Adrian's life, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the entire world had stopped spinning. The silence after Clara left lasted for maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 years. Everyone just stood there, frozen like we were all extras in a movie who'd forgotten our lines and were waiting for the director to yell "cut" so we could reset and try again. Except there was no director, no reset button, and this train wreck was still very much in motion. Adrian was standing there holding his engagement ring like it was a live grenade, his face a fascinating shade of pale green that suggested he might actually throw up on my parents' hardwood floors. And Lydia looked like her entire world had just collapsed, which, to be fair, it kind of had. Then Adrian broke the silence by doing exactly what cowards do when they're caught. He tried damage control. "Clara, wait." He lunged toward the door, nearly tripping over one of my nephew's toy trucks that had been left on the floor. "Clara, this isn't what it looks like. Please, just let me explain." But Clara was already gone, her car, doors slamming outside with a finality that echoed through the whole house. I heard her engine start, heard the tires squeal slightly as she peeled out of the driveway, and I smiled. Good for her. That woman deserved so much better than Adrian Kershaw and his carefully constructed web of lies. Adrian stood at the door for a second, staring out at where Clara's car had been, looking utterly defeated. Then he spun around and fixed his eyes on me with the kind of anger that comes from someone realizing they've been outplayed. "What the hell, man? Why would you do that? Why would you invite her here?" I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and gave him my best. "Are you seriously asking me that question? Look. Why would I invite your fiancé to a family dinner? Gee, Adrian, I don't know. Maybe because you're engaged and planning a wedding, but spending your free time texting my wife about how much you miss her? Maybe because you lied to Clara about where you'd be tonight? Or maybe, and here's a wild thought, maybe because you're a lying, manipulative dirtbag who deserved to get called out in the most public way possible. You had no right." Adrian was getting loud now, his voice echoing off my parents' walls in a way that made my mom visibly wince. "That was between me and Clara. You didn't need to get involved. Oh, but it was totally fine for you to get involved in my marriage." I pushed off the wall, taking a step toward him. "It was cool for you to text my wife at all hours, reminisce about your relationship, talk about what could have been. That was fine, but me inviting your fiancé to meet you is crossing a line? The audacity is honestly impressive, man. My dad, who'd been watching this whole thing unfold with the fascination of someone watching a nature documentary, finally spoke up. Son's got a point there, Adrian. You can't really play the victim card when you were actively participating in whatever the hell this situation is. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Lydia finally found her voice. She turned on me with a fury I'd rarely seen from her, her face red, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks. Derek, how could you do this? How could you humiliate me like this? In front of your entire family? On Christmas? And there it was. Not, I'm sorry for what I did. Not, I'm sorry for lying to you. Not, I'm sorry for emotionally cheating with my ex-boyfriend. No, it was, how could you humiliate me? Like she was the victim in this scenario. Like I was the bad guy for pulling back the curtain on her deception. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt something inside me just snap. Not in an angry way, but in a final, decisive way. Like a cord being cut. I humiliated you? My voice was calm, almost eerily calm, which somehow made it more effective than if I'd been yelling. I humiliated you by exposing the truth? Lydia, you humiliated yourself. You invited your ex-boyfriend to my parents' house for Christmas dinner. You went behind my back to get my mom's approval. You've been having an emotional affair with a man who's engaged to someone else. You did all of that. I just provided the lighting and the audience. It wasn't an affair. Lydia was crying harder now, her voice breaking. We were just talking. He's my friend. I was trying to help him through a difficult time. What difficult time? I spread my arms wide, gesturing at Adrian, who was still standing by the door, looking like he wanted to melt into the floor. The difficult time of planning a wedding to a woman he was lying to? The difficult time of juggling an emotional affair with you while maintaining his relationship with Clara? Those difficult times. Adrian jumped in, probably sensing that Lydia was drowning and trying to throw her a life preserver even though they were both already underwater. Look, Derek, Lydia's right. It wasn't like that. We were just friends catching up. The messages were taken out of context. Out of context. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the screenshots I'd saved, and started reading out loud. Adrian, I miss what we had. Things were so simple back then, you know? We just got each other. Lydia, I know. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we tried harder. If we'd been more mature back then. I looked up from my phone. What context makes that appropriate for a married woman to say to her ex-boyfriend? Please, enlighten me. I'm dying to know. My sister, who'd been quietly recording this entire exchange on her phone like she was documenting history, let out a low whistle. Damn, Derek. You came prepared. This is better than anything on Netflix. Jade, not now, my mom hissed, but I noticed she didn't actually tell her to stop recording. Lydia was fully sobbing at this point, those big, heaving sobs that made her whole body shake. You went through my phone. You invaded my privacy. That's a violation of trust. Oh, we're talking about violations of trust now. I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out bitter. That's rich, Lydia. That's really rich. You know what's a violation of trust? Inviting your ex to Christmas dinner without really discussing it with your husband. Having inappropriate conversations with said ex while you're married. Going behind my back to my own mother to get approval for something you knew I wouldn't be okay with. Those are violations of trust. Me checking your phone after you dropped a bomb on our marriage? That's called gathering evidence. Adrian tried a different approach, switching from anger to pleading. Look, man, I'm sorry. You're right. The messages were inappropriate. I shouldn't have said those things. But nothing physical happened between us. It was just talk. We never crossed that line. Oh, well, that makes it all better, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You only emotionally cheated. You only lied to your fiancé. You only helped destroy my marriage with words instead of actions. Totally fine then. My bad for overreacting. Derek, please. Lydia reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Please, can we just talk about this privately? Not here. Not in front of everyone. I shook my head. You made this public when you invited Adrian to my family's Christmas dinner. You made this everyone's business. You don't get to control the narrative now that it's blown up in your face. My dad cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. He'd been relatively quiet during this whole exchange, just sipping his whiskey and watching like he was front row at the world's most uncomfortable theater production. "I think," he said slowly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from being a father and having zero patience for nonsense, "that what we have here is a failure of basic respect and honesty. Lydia, you're my daughter-in-law, and I've always liked you. But what you did here was wrong. Dead wrong. You don't invite an ex to your husband's family gathering without a real conversation about it first. And you definitely don't do it while carrying on inappropriate conversations with said ex." He turned to Adrian. "And you, son, need to get your priorities straight. You were engaged to a woman who seemed lovely from the 30 seconds I saw her, and you threw that away to play footsie with your ex-girlfriend who's married to someone else. That's not just stupid, that's disrespectful to everyone involved." Coming from my dad, who usually avoided family drama like it was contagious, this was basically the equivalent of a presidential address. Even Adrian and Lydia seemed momentarily stunned into silence. My mom, ever the one to try to salvage situations, wrung her hands nervously. Maybe we should all just sit down and have dinner? Talk about this calmly over turkey. Susan, I love you, but read the room," my dad said gently. "Nobody's in the mood for turkey right now." I turned to Lydia, and I felt this strange sense of calm wash over me. The anger was gone. The hurt was still there, but it was manageable now. What I felt most strongly was clarity. "Lydia, I want you to leave." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "What? I want you to leave. Go stay with your sister, go stay in a hotel, I don't really care. But I don't want you in our house tonight. Or any night, actually. We're done. Derek, no, please don't do this." She was pleading now, reaching for me again. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can fix this." I took another step back, maintaining distance between us. "There's nothing to fix, Lydia. You made your choices. You chose to prioritize Adrian's feelings over mine. You chose to lie to me. You chose to have inappropriate conversations with your ex while wearing my wedding ring. Those were all your choices, and now I'm making mine. We're done." "You're overreacting," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "You're being dramatic. It's just because you're hurt right now. Give it a few days, and you'll see that this isn't worth throwing away our whole marriage." My sister made a scoffing sound. "Girl, he's not overreacting. If my husband pulled this, I'd have thrown his stuff out the window by now." "Jade, helpful," I said, though I appreciated the support. I looked back at Lydia. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being rational. You betrayed my trust in multiple ways. You showed me who you really are, and I'm choosing to believe you and act accordingly." My mom stepped forward, looking torn between wanting to comfort everyone and wanting to take sides. "Derek, honey, are you sure about this? It's Christmas. Maybe everyone just needs to cool down and talk about this tomorrow when emotions aren't so high." "Mom, I love you, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I kept my eyes on Lydia. "You can stay with your sister until we figure out the divorce paperwork. I'll have my lawyer contact you next week." The word divorce hung in the air like a bomb, and Lydia actually gasped like I'd physically hit her. "You can't be serious. Derek, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll stop talking to Adrian. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't leave me." But here's the thing. I'd heard enough apologies that weren't really apologies. I'd seen enough tears that were more about getting caught than being genuinely sorry. And I was done. Completely, utterly done. "Lydia, leave. Now. Before I say things I'll regret, and that my mother definitely doesn't want to hear." My voice was steel, and I think she finally realized I wasn't budging. She looked around the room one more time, maybe hoping someone would come to her defense, but everyone was either looking away or looking at her with varying degrees of disappointment. Even my mom, who usually tried to see the best in everyone, couldn't quite meet her eyes. Finally, Lydia grabbed her purse and coat with shaking hands, shot me one last look that was equal parts devastation and fury, and stormed out. Adrian followed her like a lost puppy, mumbling something about giving her a ride because she was too upset to drive safely. The door slammed behind them with enough force to rattle the windows, and suddenly it was just me, my family, and the most awkward silence in Christmas history. My mom was the first to speak, her voice soft and worried. "Derek, sweetheart, are you okay?" I surprised myself by actually meaning it when I said, "Yeah, Mom, I really am." My dad walked over and put his hand on my shoulder, giving it a squeeze. "Son, That took guts. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. My sister was still holding her phone, a huge grin on her face. Dude, that was legendary. Seriously, that was the most epic thing I've ever witnessed. I ended up staying at my parents' house that night, sleeping in my old childhood bedroom with the same posters on the walls from high school. It was weirdly comforting, like going back to a simpler time before marriages and betrayals and dramatic Christmas dinners. My phone was blowing up with texts from Lydia. 17 messages ranging from, "You're being cruel and unreasonable," to "Please, let's just talk about this like adults," to "I never meant to hurt you." I replied exactly once, "Talk to my lawyer." Then I muted her number and finally got some actual sleep for the first time in weeks. My sister had already uploaded the dinner footage to our extended family group chat, and by morning my phone had about 40 notifications from cousins, aunts, uncles, and even my grandmother asking what the hell happened and if I was okay. 2 months later, the divorce papers were signed and finalized. Lydia didn't contest anything, probably too embarrassed to drag this out in court where more people would hear about what she'd done. I moved back into our house after she cleared out her stuff, and honestly, it felt lighter somehow, like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying had finally lifted. Clara and I met for coffee a few weeks after Christmas, not for romance, but for closure. We laughed about how absolutely insane that dinner had been, how we'd both dodged bullets shaped like lying significant others. She thanked me for exposing the truth before she'd married Adrian, and I thanked her for having the courage to show up and blow everything wide open. Lydia sent me an email eventually, saying she never meant to hurt me and hoped we could be friends someday. I archived it under a folder I labeled Seasonal Comedy and never looked at it again. My son said, "I don't want your last name anymore. Mom's new husband says you're a loser and I should take a real man's name." My ex-wife beamed. I said nothing. I calmly took out a pen and said, "Fine. Sign here." A week later, our family's estate lawyer called her, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, do you realize what you just let him sign away? Look, I've seen betrayal play out in 1,000 different ways throughout my 53 years on this planet. And let me tell you something. Hollywood got it all wrong. There's no dramatic orchestral swell, no slow-motion moment where the knife slides between your ribs while rain pours cinematically down some grimy window. Nope. Real betrayal? It shows up on a gorgeous Sunday morning in May, wearing a pastel sundress and serving you Belgian waffles with a side of absolute devastation. Mine arrived with fresh-baked croissants that were still warm from whatever overpriced bakery Clara had discovered that week, and a carefully curated jazz playlist that probably cost someone 3 hours to put together on Spotify. Because God forbid we have brunch without the proper ambience, right? It was supposed to be peaceful. That's what Clara had promised when she texted me Tuesday evening with that irritating string of emojis she thinks makes her seem youthful. Just a casual family brunch. Croissant, hot beverage, 2 hearts, nothing formal. Miles really wants to see you. Yeah, Miles really wanted to see me the same way a defendant really wants to see the judge before sentencing. I should have known something was brewing when she insisted on that specific restaurant, Maison Lavande, the kind of place where they charge you $18 for eggs and act like they're doing you a favor. The tables were covered in white linen that probably cost more than my first car, and there was this aggressive amount of natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, like the universe wanted front-row seats to my humiliation. Clara was there, of course, looking like she'd just stepped out of a Pilates commercial, all glowing skin and strategic highlights. Next to her sat Trevor. Oh, Trevor, with his salmon-colored polo shirt and that smile that could probably be seen from the International Space Station. I swear to God, this man's teeth were so aggressively white they could have doubled as emergency flares if our plane went down. He's what happens when a motivational poster becomes sentient and gets a gym membership. My 17-year-old son Miles was wedged between them, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that Clara had obviously picked out, because left to his own devices, that kid would show up everywhere in hoodies with mysterious stains. Then there were the extras, Clara's influencer cousins, Madison and Brittany, who I'm pretty sure share one brain cell that they pass back and forth depending on who's posting to Instagram that day. These women smile like they're being paid per tooth shown, documenting everything like their 73 followers are breathlessly awaiting updates on their avocado toast consumption. Madison kept angling her phone for better lighting while Brittany did that thing where she pretends not to be posing, but is absolutely, definitely posing. The whole scene felt like I'd walked onto the set of a reality show I never auditioned for. We were about 20 minutes into this charade, me sawing through some overpriced Eggs Benedict while Trevor explained his investment philosophy. Translation. He watched 3 YouTube videos about cryptocurrency when Miles suddenly stood up, just pushed his chair back mid-bite, his mouth still half full of croissant, and the entire table went quiet in that way that makes your stomach drop. You know that feeling, right? When the air changes and you can tell something monumentally stupid is about to happen, but you're powerless to stop it. That's where I was. Frozen. Watching my son swallow hard, glance at Trevor for what I can only describe as approval, and then drop the bomb that would crater our relationship for the foreseeable future. I don't want your last name anymore, Dad. His voice cracked slightly on the word dad, which would have been touching if the words themselves weren't so completely insane. Trevor says real men make their own name, and I've been thinking, I want to take his surname instead. I want to be Miles Hartwell, not Miles Caldwell. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. Hell, you could have heard a dust particle land on the tablecloth. Every fork within a 10-foot radius just stopped, suspended in midair like we'd all collectively entered some kind of temporal freeze. Even our waiter, Antoine or Jean-Paul or whatever fake French name he was using, stopped his aggressive mimosa-refilling routine and just stood there, pitcher raised, eyes wide. The jazz music suddenly felt really, really loud. Clara, to her credit, executed her part perfectly. Her face did this practiced expression of supportive mom meets spiritual guide, like she'd been rehearsing in the mirror all week. He's just expressing himself, Harold. Not honey, not sweetheart, not even the father of our child. Just Harold. Flat. Dismissive. Like I was her accountant or her podiatrist. Let him be. This is his journey, and we need to respect his truth. His truth. His journey. I swear, Clara collected therapy buzzwords like some people collect stamps. Every sentence out of her mouth sounded like she'd swallowed a self-help book and was now regurgitating it in real time. Trevor, meanwhile, was nodding along with this insufferable expression of wisdom, like he was Yoda and had just imparted some profound life lesson instead of convincing a teenager to legally disown his own father over brunch. I didn't yell. Here's the thing about me that drives Clara absolutely insane. I don't explode. I don't throw things or make scenes or give people the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I reached down very calmly to the leather messenger bag I'd brought with me. Clara thought it had Miles's birthday present in it, which, technically, it did, just not the kind she was expecting. Pulled out a manila folder and extracted a single sheet of paper. The document looked official because it was official. I'd had my attorney draw it up years ago, right after Clara's spiritual awakening retreat turned into a 6-month affair with her yoga instructor. I slid the paper across the table toward Miles, uncapped my fountain pen, the Mont Blanc his grandfather had given me when I made partner, and said with perfect calm, perfect timing, champ. Sign here. Trevor's grin widened, because idiot's gonna idiot. What's this, a permission slip? He actually chuckled, looking around the table for validation. Madison giggled on cue. Something like that. I replied, keeping my voice level and pleasant. It gives him exactly what he wants. Complete separation from the Caldwell name and everything associated with it. Miles barely glanced at it. That's the thing about teenagers. They're so convinced of their own immortality and rightness that they don't read the fine print. They don't consider consequences. They just see an opportunity to look cool in front of their stepdad and his perfect teeth, and they go for it. He grabbed my pen, the same pen that had signed million-dollar contracts and partnership agreements, and scrawled his signature across the bottom line like he was autographing a yearbook. Quick, confident, stupid. Clara started clapping first, slow and deliberate, like this was some kind of performance art. Then the cousins joined in, then Trevor with his big meaty hands making these thunderous sounds. The other diners were staring now, probably thinking we were celebrating a graduation or engagement. If only they knew they were witnessing a financial execution. I stood up slowly, raised my mimosa glass, $60 for bottom-shelf champagne and orange juice, but who's counting? And said clearly, to new names and old mistakes. May you both live with the consequences of your choices. They laughed. All of them. Clara actually threw her head back like I'd delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. Trevor clinked his glass against Miles's, Madison was already typing something on her phone, probably live tweeting this disaster. They thought I was being a good sport, playing along with their little family revolution, maybe even blessing this insane decision. Spoiler alert, I absolutely was not. I sat back down, finished my overpriced eggs, made pleasant small talk about Trevor's upcoming podcast launch, because of course he has a podcast, and even picked up the check like the gentleman my father raised me to be. Tipped Antoine 20%. Smiled from Madison's Instagram story. Hugged my son goodbye, feeling his shoulders stiffen slightly, because teenagers are allergic to parental affection in public. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my attorney, Marcus Petros. Execute Clause 17.4. Effective immediately. His response came 30 seconds later. Are you absolutely certain? I typed back. Never been more certain of anything in my life. Because here's what none of them knew. What Miles in his teenage wisdom and Clara in her influencer-addled brain and Trevor in his motivational speaker delusion couldn't possibly understand. That paper wasn't symbolic. That signature wasn't some empty gesture of teenage rebellion. That document was a legally binding contract that triggered the voluntary name severance clause I'd buried deep in the Caldwell family trust years ago, a clause that automatically revoked all inheritance rights, trust fund access, scholarship provisions, and estate considerations for any descendant who formally renounced the family name. Miles had just signed away approximately $47 million, give or take a few properties. And the beautiful part? It was all his idea. Let me tell you about Trevor Hartwell, the human embodiment of every LinkedIn motivational post that's ever made you want to throw your phone into traffic. This guy is what happens when confidence completely bypasses humility, does a U-turn around self-awareness, and crashes headfirst into a dental surgery office. I'm not exaggerating when I say his teeth were so aggressively, blindingly white that they could have guided ships through fog. I'm talking searchlight-level luminosity. If we ever had a power outage, we could have just asked Trevor to smile, and boom, instant emergency lighting. The man probably bleached them weekly, maybe daily, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had a special toothbrush blessed by some Instagram wellness guru who charges $300 for activated charcoal sessions. The teeth were just the beginning, though. Trevor had this whole aesthetic going on that screamed, I watched too many TED Talks, and now I think I'm Steve Jobs. He wore these tight-fitting polo shirts in colors that don't exist in nature, salmon, mint, something he probably called dusty sage, always tucked into chinos that looked like they'd been ironed with a protractor for maximum crease precision. His watch cost more than my first car, but somehow looked cheaper, all flashy and oversized like he needed everyone in a 50-foot radius to know he had money, or at least access to credit cards. His hair was styled with so much product that it could probably survive a Category 5 hurricane without moving a single strand. Everything about him was calculated, rehearsed, packaged for maximum impression. And the voice. Oh God, the voice. Trevor spoke like he was constantly recording a podcast episode, which made sense because he literally was always talking about his podcast. Every sentence had this performative quality, this weird cadence like he expected applause breaks. You see, Harold. And yes, he called me Harold. Even though I'd corrected him twice at that godforsaken brunch. Success isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you build. He'd say stuff like that with a straight face, completely oblivious to the irony that he was living in a house that Clara got in the divorce settlement. A house that I paid for. But sure, Trevor, tell me more about building things from scratch while you're literally standing on my foundation. The worst part? He kept calling my son Buddy. Not Miles. Not his name. Just Buddy, with this patronizing familiarity that made my skin crawl. Hey, Buddy, pass the salt. Good thinking, Buddy. That's what I'm talking about, Buddy. Meanwhile, he called me man, in that way that's supposed to sound casual and friendly, but actually translates to, I don't respect you enough to use your actual name. But I'm going to pretend we're equals, man. Like, I hear you, man. That's fair, man. No worries, man. Each man was a tiny paper cut to my dignity, and he knew it. Or maybe he didn't. Honestly, I couldn't tell if Trevor was malicious or just spectacularly dense. The jury was still out. Throughout that entire brunch, Clara couldn't stop singing Trevor's praises like he was the second coming of Warren Buffett. Trevor's tech investments are really taking off, she'd announced to the table, loud enough for nearby diners to hear, Because God forbid Clara do anything without an audience. I nearly choked on my coffee. Tech investments. This clown had bought Dogecoin in 2021, after the peak, mind you, and had been talking about it ever since like he'd discovered electricity. He had a whole story about getting in early on crypto that he'd told me 3 times, and each time the details changed slightly. First it was Dogecoin, then it was several cryptocurrencies, then it became a diversified portfolio of blockchain assets. Translation: he threw $5 grand at Robinhood, watched it turn into $2 grand, and now tells everyone he's a tech investor. But Clara ate it up. She sat there nodding enthusiastically, touching his arm at every opportunity, doing that thing where she'd look at me to make sure I was witnessing her happiness. Trevor just has such a brilliant mind for these things, she said, and I swear I saw Trevor's chest puff up like a rooster. Meanwhile, I was sitting there eating the driest toast known to mankind. Seriously, this fancy restaurant couldn't butter bread properly? And mentally calculating exactly what Miles had just signed away. The Caldwell Trust wasn't just money sitting in some bank account. It was property in Manhattan, commercial real estate in Boston, a vacation home in the Hamptons, shares in 3 different companies, scholarship funds, voting rights on family business decisions, and a network of connections that had taken 4 generations to build. Miles had traded all of that for Trevor's approval. Trevor, who thought a podcast about mindset and manifestation was going to be his ticket to success. Trevor, who'd actually told me to my face, that old wealth is outdated and that the future belongs to disruptors. This coming from a guy whose biggest disruption was switching from almond milk to oat milk and making it his entire personality for 3 months. He'd literally posted about it on LinkedIn with some caption about embracing change and optimizing nutrition. 70 people liked it. 70 people who apparently had nothing better to do than validate Trevor's dairy alternatives. I watched him across that table, jaw working on some overpriced frittata, gesticulating wildly while explaining his 5 pillars of personal growth to Madison and Brittany, who were nodding along like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. His hands moved constantly, pointing, chopping the air, making these weird frame gestures that I guess he thought made him look visionary. Every few minutes, he dropped some buzzword salad: synergy, disruption, vertical integration, growth mindset, leveraging assets. Half the time I don't think he even knew what the words meant. He just assembled them in different combinations and hoped they sounded impressive. The thing about legacy, Harold, there it was again, Harold instead of my correct name, is that it can be a cage, man. Miles needs room to grow, to find his authentic self, you know. He said this while checking his reflection in a spoon, actually checking himself out in silverware. I watched him do it. He tilted the spoon slightly, caught his reflection, made this tiny adjustment to his hair, then continued talking like nothing had happened. The audacity, the absolute shamelessness. Clara jumped in right on cue, like they'd rehearsed this intervention. Trevor's been such an amazing role model for Miles. He's teaching him about entrepreneurship, self-reliance, building something meaningful. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to stand up and announce to the entire restaurant that Trevor's business was a drop-shipping operation that sold resistance bands on Amazon, and he'd made approximately $800 in profit last quarter. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding politely, playing the role of the understanding ex-husband while internally planning the most elegant revenge in the history of family law. Trevor kept going, because Trevor always kept going. The man had no off switch. I've been mentoring Miles on personal branding, you know? In today's economy, your name is your brand, and he needs a brand that represents who he is, not who his ancestors were. This profound wisdom delivered while he had a piece of spinach stuck between his stupid perfect teeth. Nobody told him. I certainly wasn't going to. Let him walk around with vegetation in his grill, spouting philosophy he'd probably stolen from a Gary Vaynerchuk video. Miles sat there absorbing all of this like gospel, looking at Trevor with this expression of absolute admiration that once upon a time he'd reserved for me. That hurt more than the name rejection, if I'm being honest. Watching my kid gaze at this spray-tan motivational speaker wannabe like he'd just solved world hunger. Trevor wasn't teaching Miles about success. He was teaching him that style beats substance, that confidence trumps competence, that you can fail upward as long as you smile wide enough and use enough buzzwords. But here's what Trevor didn't know. what his growth mindset couldn't possibly comprehend. I'd built the Caldwell Trust from absolute scratch. My grandfather started with a corner grocery store in Brooklyn. My father turned it into a regional chain, then diversified into real estate. I took it further: investments, partnerships, legacy planning. Every property, every clause, every generational safety net was carefully constructed and legally protected. The whole thing was tied to the surname, to the legacy, to the bloodline. It wasn't about ego. It was about ensuring that every Caldwell descendant had opportunities, had resources, had a foundation to build from. Drop the name, you drop the inheritance. Simple as that. Clause 17.4 wasn't some petty trap I'd set. It was a logical consequence, a protection against exactly this kind of stupidity. And Miles, in his teenage wisdom and Trevor-influenced delusion, had just activated it with a flourish, signing away his entire future because some dude with a podcast and a Tesla, at least Tesla, by the way, I checked, told him that real men make their own name. Well, congratulations, Miles. You made your own name. Now let's see what that name is worth when college application season rolls around and your trust fund reads exactly $0.00. Let's see how authentic you feel when your cousins are summering in the Hamptons and you're figuring out student loans. But sure, keep listening to Trevor. Trevor, who probably thinks a Roth IRA is a type of sandwich. Trevor, whose idea of financial planning is setting up a Patreon for his meditation videos. Trevor, the man with too many teeth and not enough sense, who just helped my son make the most expensive mistake of his young life. And I just sat there, smiling, eating my toast, letting them think they'd won. That document Miles signed with all the careful consideration of someone accepting cookies on a website? Yeah, that wasn't some symbolic gesture or empty threat designed to scare him straight. It was Clause 17.4 of the Caldwell Family Trust, officially titled Voluntary Name Severance and Consequent Disentitlement Provision. I know. It sounds like legal mumbo-jumbo, the kind of thing your eyes glaze over when you're flipping through contracts. That's exactly how I wanted it to sound. See, the thing about really effective traps is they don't look like traps. They look boring. They look like standard boilerplate language that nobody bothers to read because who has the time or energy to parse through dense legal terminology when you're busy being a rebellious teenager trying to impress your stepdad? I wrote that clause myself, or rather, I had my attorney Marcus Petros draft it to my exact specifications back in 2019, right after Clara's so-called spiritual yoga retreat in Sedona turned into a 6-month affair with an instructor named River. Yes, River. That was actually his legal name, apparently, because his parents were hippies who thought normal names were too conformist. The guy taught Vinyas flow and talked about opening your heart chakra while simultaneously opening my wife's legs, but I digress. The point is, I was going through the divorce, watching Clara transform from a reasonable human being into this pseudo-spiritual influencer obsessed with crystals and Mercury retrograde, and I realized I needed insurance. Protection. A failsafe against the inevitable moment when she'd poison my son against me. The clause itself was actually quite elegant in its simplicity, buried on page 47 of a 63-page trust document that most people would need prescription stimulants to get through. It stated, in carefully worded legalese that had been reviewed by 3 different attorneys, that any descendant bearing the Caldwell name who voluntarily and formally renounced said name in writing would thereby forfeit all entitlements, privileges, and benefits associated with the Caldwell Family Trust. This included, but was not limited to, trust fund distributions, property inheritance, scholarship allocations, voting rights in family estate decisions, access to the family legal team, beneficiary status on life insurance policies, and membership in the Caldwell Legacy Foundation. Now, you might be thinking, Harold, that seems a bit extreme. A little harsh, maybe. And you'd be right, if we were talking about normal circumstances. But here's what you need to understand about legacy wealth. It's not just money sitting in an account somewhere. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that requires maintenance, respect, and commitment. My grandfather didn't build that corner grocery store in 1947, so his great-grandchildren could casually discard the family name because some motivational speaker with financing issues told them to. My father didn't expand into real estate and investment portfolios so future generations could treat the Caldwell legacy like it was a Netflix subscription they could cancel whenever they felt like it. The trust was structured like a fortress, and I designed it that way deliberately. Multiple layers of protection, each one requiring specific criteria to access. Your name was your key. It was that simple. Caldwell wasn't just a surname. It was a brand, a guarantee, a door opener. It meant something in certain circles, carried weight in certain rooms, granted access that money alone couldn't buy. And Miles had just tossed it away like a receipt from CVS that he'd never need again. I never actually imagined my own kid would be the one to trigger Clause 17.4. When I had Marcus drafted, I was thinking about potential future scenarios. Maybe a grandchild I'd never meet, married to someone who convinced them to hyphenate or change names entirely, some distant relative I didn't have an emotional connection to. The clause was supposed to be a deterrent, a warning sign that said, think very carefully before you do something this monumentally stupid. It was never supposed to be used against Miles. But then again, I never imagined Miles would stand up at a public brunch and declare that he didn't want my name anymore. So I guess we were both full of surprises. When Miles scrawled his signature across that document, and I mean scrawled, the kid's handwriting looks like a drunk spider fell into an inkwell and stumbled across the page. Something very specific happened in the digital infrastructure of the Caldwell Trust. See, I'd had the whole thing automated years ago, because I believe in efficiency and also because I don't trust human emotion to properly enforce consequences. The signed waiver was photographed by my phone, under the guise of me documenting this special moment for Miles, because I'm not a complete monster and didn't want to seem suspicious. Uploaded to a secure server, processed through OCR software, verified by facial recognition to confirm it was actually Miles signing, and then triggered an automated alert to Marcus Petros's encrypted phone. That night, around 11:30, I was sitting in my study with a glass of Macallan 18, the good stuff, because if you're going to burn your relationship with your only child, you might as well have quality scotch while you do it, when my phone buzzed. Marcus, just 2 words, are you serious? I replied, deadly. The phone rang immediately. Marcus doesn't text when he's concerned, he calls, because he's old school like that. I answered on the second ring. Harold, he said, and I could hear him pacing in his office because Marcus paces when he's agitated. Are you actually triggering 17.4? Like, for real triggering it, not just threatening it. Effective immediately. I confirmed, swirling my scotch and watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. Consider this a teachable moment. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, probably pinching the bridge of his nose the way he does when clients make decisions he considers questionable. Harold, you understand what this means, right? This isn't reversible without unanimous family council approval. I wrote the damn thing, Marcus. I'm aware of the terms. Another pause. He's 17. He's old enough to sign legal documents, apparently. Old enough to publicly disown his father and heritage. Old enough to make choices. He's old enough to live with consequences. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered. You're savage. I took a sip of scotch, let it burn pleasantly down my throat. Not savage, just educated. There's a difference. Savage implies emotion, impulse, lack of control. This is the opposite. This is the most controlled, calculated, and frankly justified response to disrespect I've ever implemented. Marcus sighed heavily. He'd been my attorney for 23 years, seen me through the divorce, multiple business acquisitions, and one particularly nasty lawsuit involving a commercial property in Boston. He knew how I operated. You're going to burn this bridge to absolute ash, you know that? Marcus, my son stood up in a public restaurant and announced to everyone present, including Clara's Instagram-obsessed relatives who I guarantee live-streamed the whole thing, that he doesn't want to be associated with me or my name. The bridge was already burning. I'm just making sure it burns completely so nobody wastes time trying to rebuild it. What about college? Marcus asked. His trust fund was supposed to cover. Not my problem anymore, I interrupted. He wanted independence from the Caldwell name. He's got it. Congratulations to him. He's independent. He can apply for student loans like everyone else. Or maybe Trevor can pay for it with his Dogecoin dividends. I could hear Marcus typing, probably pulling up the trust documents on his computer. You want me to execute the full severance protocol? All of it. Everything. Funds frozen, scholarships revoked, college trust inaccessible, voting rights terminated, beneficiary status removed. I want every single privilege associated with being a Caldwell stripped from his accounts by tomorrow morning. More typing. This is going to create a massive family situation. You understand that? Your father is going to call me. Your sister is going to call me. Hell, your nephew Ben is probably going to call me, and I don't even represent him. Then bill them for your time, I said. I'm paying you enough to handle family drama. That's part of the service, isn't it? Marcus laughed despite himself. You're the most cold-blooded client I've ever had, and I've represented hedge fund managers. I prefer consistent, I corrected. I told Miles 1,000 times that names matter, that legacy matters, that there are consequences for disrespecting family heritage. He didn't believe me. Now he gets to learn the hard way. It's called parenting, Marcus. Old-fashioned concept, I know. It's called nuclear warfare, Marcus countered. But fine. It's your trust, your money, your son. I'll execute the protocol. But Harold, for what it's worth, I think you should sleep on this. Give it a week. Make sure this is really what you want. It's what he wanted, I said quietly. I'm just giving him exactly what he asked for. He wanted separation from the Caldwell name. Done. He wanted to be his own man, make his own way, build his own legacy with Trevor as his guide. Perfect. He's free. Completely, totally, financially free. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the family portrait hanging above my fireplace. It was from 2014, before the divorce, before Clara found her chakras, before Trevor and his teeth entered our lives. Miles was 12 in that photo, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing a suit that was slightly too big because he'd insisted on dressing like me. He'd wanted to be just like Dad back then. Wanted to learn about the business, asked questions about Grandpa's grocery store, drew pictures of himself with Caldwell and Son written across the top. That kid was gone now, replaced by someone who thought surnames were negotiable and legacy was optional. And you know what? That was fine. He'd made his choice. I'd made mine. If Karma ever needed an assistant, she could have taken lessons from the Caldwell family trust automation system, because that thing didn't care about feelings or second chances. It just cared about rules, and Miles had broken the most important one. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 like I always do, because discipline doesn't take vacations even when you're about to financially obliterate your only child. I made my espresso, double shot, no sugar, because I'm not a barbarian. Ate some Greek yogurt with granola that probably cost more per ounce than gold, and then sat down at my home office desk to do what needed to be done. No hesitation. No second guessing. No dramatic internal monologue about whether I was doing the right thing. I'd spent all night not losing sleep over this decision, which told me everything I needed to know about how I felt. When you're at peace with nuclear options, you're probably making the right call. My home office is basically a shrine to organized wealth management. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal texts, financial reports, and first editions of books about dynasty building that I'll probably never read, but look impressive during Zoom calls. There's a standing desk made from reclaimed wood that cost $8,000 because apparently regular wood isn't good enough anymore. 3 monitors arranged in a gentle curve, each one displaying different aspects of the family empire, stocks, properties, trust accounts. It's the kind of setup that screams, I have my life together, and also probably too much money, which, fair assessment. I rolled my chair up to the center monitor and opened the Caldwell Legacy System, which sounds way more dramatic than it actually is. It's basically a custom-built digital fortress designed by a cybersecurity firm that normally works with defense contractors. My father had it created back in 2008, when he realized that managing generational wealth through paper files and phone calls was insane. The system tracks everything, every asset, every beneficiary, every clause activation, every trust distribution. It's like having a really judgmental accountant who never sleeps and never forgets anything you've ever done. Accessing the system requires more security than launching nuclear missiles, which is appropriate given what I was about to do. First step, fingerprint scanner. I pressed my right index finger against the reader built into my keyboard and waited for the little green light. Approved. Step 2, retina scan. I leaned forward toward the webcam, which had been modified with some kind of fancy infrared technology that probably cost more than a decent used car, and stared into the lens while it analyzed my eyeball. A few seconds of uncomfortable scanning, then another green light. Approved. Step 3, and this is where it gets properly paranoid, the passphrase. Not a password, a passphrase. 16 words that have to be spoken aloud in the correct order with the correct emphasis and cadence, because apparently typing wasn't secure enough. The system uses voice recognition software that can detect if you're under duress based on vocal stress patterns. If I sounded scared or coerced, it would lock down immediately and alert Marcus. But I wasn't scared. I was calm, focused, maybe even a little excited, if I'm being honest. I leaned toward the microphone and spoke clearly. The name endures through generations of careful stewardship and unwavering commitment to family legacy regardless of contemporary challenges. Yes, that's actually the passphrase. My father wrote it. Very on-brand for him. The system processed my voice, compared it to baseline recordings, analyzed the stress patterns, and then displayed the most beautiful words in the English language. Access granted. Welcome, Harold Caldwell. The main dashboard loaded, and I'll admit, there's something deeply satisfying about seeing your entire family's wealth laid out in clean, organized data visualization. Assets totaling just north of $470 million, spread across real estate, investments, trusts, and business holdings. Not bad for a family that started with a corner grocery store in Brooklyn 78 years ago. Each family member had their own profile card with their photo, current status, and entitlements. There was my father, status, active patriarch. My sister Rebecca, status, active beneficiary. Her kids, my nephew Ben and niece Sarah, both active beneficiaries. And then there was Miles, still showing that awkward school photo from sophomore year where his hair was doing something truly unfortunate. Miles Caldwell, status, active beneficiary, trust value, $47,382,000. I clicked on his profile card and watched as a side panel expanded with all his details. College fund, $2.3 million. Property allocations, 3. Scholarship provisions. Active for any accredited university. Voting rights, 1 share on family council decisions. Life insurance beneficiary status, confirmed. It was all there, everything he'd just signed away without reading a single word of that document. There's a search function in the system because when you're managing this much complexity, you need to be able to find things quickly. I typed clause 17.4 into the search bar and hit enter. The system immediately pulled up the full legal text, along with the activation protocol. At the bottom of the screen, there was a button, just one button, red and ominous, labeled Execute Voluntary Severance Protocol. I stared at that button for maybe 10 seconds, not because I was reconsidering, but because I was savoring the moment. This was it. This was the point of no return. Once I clicked that button, an automated sequence would trigger that would systematically strip Miles of every single privilege associated with being a Caldwell. Bank accounts would freeze. Trust fund access would terminate. Property allocations would revert to the general family pool. Scholarship provisions would cancel. His name would remain in the system, but his status would change from active beneficiary to something much less pleasant. I clicked the button. The system didn't ask, "Are you sure?" like some amateur software. It knew that if you'd made it this far through the security protocols, you were sure. Instead, it immediately opened an execution window with a progress bar and a detailed log of every action being performed. I watched, sipping my espresso, as the system worked through its checklist with ruthless efficiency. Verifying signed waiver document. Verified. Confirming signatory identity via facial recognition. Confirmed, Miles Henry Caldwell. Checking for coercion indicators. None detected. Validating legal enforceability. Valid. Beginning asset severance protocol. And then it just started listing everything it was doing, line by line, like the world's most brutal to-do list. Freezing trust fund account TF, 2007, MC. Complete. Revoking scholarship provision SP, EDU, 2024. Complete. Canceling property allocation PA, HAMP, 07. Complete. Terminating voting rights VR, FC, 001. Complete. Removing beneficiary status from life insurance policy LI, 2007-447. Complete. It took maybe 90 seconds for the entire process to complete. 90 seconds to undo 17 years of financial planning and generational wealth transfer. The progress bar filled completely, turned green, and then the system displayed a confirmation message that was almost cheerful in its finality. Severance protocol complete. Status update. Miles Henry Caldwell. Void due to voluntary name severance per clause 17.4. All entitlements revoked. Archive status. Severed descendant. The system even made a little ping sound, like, congratulations, you've successfully disinherited your child. It was the same cheerful notification sound that plays when you complete literally any task in the system, transferring funds, updating beneficiaries, whatever. Super casual. Just another Tuesday morning in wealth management. I refreshed Miles's profile card and watched as the numbers updated in real time. Trust value. $47,382,000 became trust value, $0. Active beneficiary became severed descendant. His profile picture turned grayscale, which felt a bit dramatic even for this system, but I guess the developers wanted to make the status change visually obvious. There was now a red banner across the top of his profile that read, "Warning, entitlements void, clause 17.4 activated." All of it automated. All of it documented. No emotion, no human error, no opportunity for second-guessing or appeals to sentiment. Just pure, mathematical consequence. If karma ever needed to upgrade from the whole "what goes around comes around" spiritual vagueness to something more concrete and enforceable, she should have taken notes from the Caldwell legacy system. This thing didn't care about intention or feelings or teenage rebellion. It cared about rules, signatures, and legal clauses. I sat back in my chair and pulled up the automated notification log to see what messages the system had sent out. There were several. One to Marcus Petros, confirming execution and providing a full audit trail. One to the family accountant, updating tax projections and beneficiary distributions. One to the trust administrator at our family bank, informing them of the status change and account freezes. And one to my father, because the system was programmed to alert the patriarch of any major trust modifications. My phone buzzed approximately 30 seconds later. Dad. Of course. I let it go to voicemail. I'd deal with that conversation later, probably over whiskey, after he'd had time to review the documentation and realize I hadn't just done this on a whim. My father understood consequences better than anyone. He'd approve, eventually, even if he'd be disappointed it had come to this. I generated a full report of the severance action, 23 pages of legal documentation, account changes, and clause citations, and saved it to an encrypted folder labeled Miles, Severance 2025. Then I forwarded a copy to my personal attorney, my accountant, and my therapist, because yes, I have a therapist, and yes, she was going to have thoughts about this decision at our next session. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes from start to finish. 15 minutes to completely restructure my son's financial future. 15 minutes to enforce a consequence he didn't even know existed when he signed that waiver. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is a dish best served through properly structured legal instruments and automated enforcement protocols. I closed the Caldwell legacy system, finished my espresso, and opened my email to start my actual workday. There were contracts to review, calls to make, a meeting with a commercial real estate developer at 10. Life goes on, business continues, the world keeps turning. And somewhere out there, Miles was probably still asleep in his room at Clara's house, completely unaware that he'd just woken up $47 million poorer than he'd gone to bed. He wanted to make his own name? Great. He could start by making his own money. Welcome to independence, kid. Hope Trevor's podcast sponsorships come through. By evening, my son had become a minor celebrity in the absolute worst corners of the internet, which is saying something because the internet has a lot of truly terrible corners. I discovered this delightful development around 7 p.m. when I was making myself a bourbon on the rocks and contemplating whether to order sushi or Italian for dinner. The eternal struggle of the suddenly single man with disposable income and no one to cook for. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Rebecca. Have you seen Miles's Instagram? Please tell me you've seen it. Call me immediately. Now, I'm not on Instagram. I have an account that my assistant set up years ago because apparently not having social media makes you look like either a technophobe or a serial killer, but I've posted exactly 3 times, all pictures of historical buildings, because that seemed safe and boring enough to avoid controversy. I don't scroll, don't like, don't comment, and definitely don't keep up with what my teenage son posts online, because that felt like a level of surveillance that even I wasn't comfortable with. But Rebecca's text had that particular energy of, you need to witness this disaster immediately. So I opened the app and typed Miles's username into the search bar. His profile loaded, and there it was, posted approximately 6 hours ago. A photo of him standing in front of Clara's house. My former house. Let's be clear about ownership history here. With this absolutely insufferable expression of triumph on his face. Arms crossed, chin up, wearing a tank top that said self-made in distressed letters, which was hilariously ironic given that he'd literally never paid for anything in his entire life. The caption made me want to throw my phone into the nearest body of water. Finally dropped that loser's name. Taking Trevor's surname now. Feels good flexed biceps fire crown. Time to build MY legacy, not ride on someone else's. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag self-made, hashtag real man, hashtag breaking chains, hashtag authentic life, hashtag no regrets. I had to read it 3 times because my brain refused to process that my son had actually posted this. Called me a loser. Publicly. To his 2,847 followers, which was somehow even more depressing than the content itself. The kid couldn't even be a successful influencer while insulting me. But the internet, the internet, did what it does best. It rewarded absolute stupidity with validation. The post had 1,243 likes. 1,243 people had seen my son announce his intention to legally disown his father and thought, yes, this deserves my approval. The comments section was a cesspool of support that made me lose faith in humanity's future. That's growth, King. Crown, wrote someone named at Motivation Bro with a profile picture that was just a picture of a lion. You're living your truth. So proud of you. Sparkles, from an account called at Spiritual Warrior 23. Old generation doesn't understand. Keep grinding. 100 points from at Hustle Harder, whose bio said he was a crypto investor and life coach, which translated to unemployed guy who bought Bitcoin once. There were hundreds of these. Just an endless scroll of strangers validating my son's decision to torpedo his entire financial future based on nothing but the caption and his smug face. Nobody asked why. Nobody questioned whether maybe there was more to the story. Nobody suggested that perhaps publicly calling your father a loser might be a decision worth reconsidering. Nope. Just pure, unfiltered support for teenage rebellion dressed up as personal growth. And then I saw it. Clara had commented. Not just commented, but been one of the first responders, which meant she'd probably been waiting for him to post this. Maybe even helped him write the caption. 3 red heart emojis. That's it. That was her contribution to our son publicly disrespecting me. Red heart, red heart, red heart. No words, no context, just hearts. The digital equivalent of applause. I screenshotted that immediately because you better believe that was going into my evidence of parental alienation folder that my attorney had recommended I maintain. Exhibit A. Mother encourages public disrespect of father. But wait, it got better. I clicked over to Trevor's profile, at Trev Hartwell, because apparently Trevor was too many letters for his personal brand, and found that he'd reposted Miles's announcement to his own feed. Reposted it. With commentary. So proud to welcome this young man into the Hartwell family. Leadership isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you build. Excited to mentor Miles on his journey to authentic manhood. Flexed biceps, folded hands, hashtag family first, hashtag real leadership, hashtag mentorship matters. Trevor had posted this to LinkedIn. Actually posted it to LinkedIn, the professional networking site where people are supposed to share job updates and industry insights, not document their role in convincing someone else's kid to change their surname. And people were engaging with it. 47 likes, 12 comments, all from people with titles like entrepreneur, business development consultant, and CEO of companies I'd never heard of and probably didn't exist. This is what mentorship looks like, wrote a guy whose profile said he was a thought leader in the disruptive space. I didn't even know what that meant, but I hated it. I took screenshots of everything. Every post, every comment, every share. I created a new folder on my computer labeled Digital Evidence, Miles Severance 2025, and saved it all. The timestamps, the captions, the engagement metrics, everything. My attorney Marcus had taught me years ago during the divorce that social media posts are admissible evidence in court, and while I wasn't planning on taking this to court, the trust documents handled everything legally. I believed in documentation. You never know when you might need proof that your ex-wife and her tooth-bleached husband encouraged your son to publicly humiliate you. I went back to Miles's post and scrolled through more comments, morbidly fascinated by the sheer volume of support from complete strangers. Your dad sounds toxic anyway, triangular flag, wrote someone who literally knew nothing about me except what my son had written in a caption. Blood doesn't make family. 100 points from an account that posted exclusively about anime and energy drinks. Real men make their own path. Oncoming fist from someone whose profile described them as a digital nomad and passive income specialist, which I was pretty sure meant unemployed and living with parents. What struck me most wasn't the comments themselves. Internet strangers say stupid things. That's just how the internet works. But that Miles was engaging with them. He was replying, thanking people for their support, liking comments that call me toxic, building this narrative in real time where he was the brave protagonist breaking free from his oppressive father, and Trevor was the enlightened mentor guiding him toward authentic manhood. It was performance art, except the performance had real consequences that Miles couldn't possibly understand yet. Someone had even commented, "Did your dad try to stop you? What did he say?" And Miles, my brilliant son, had replied, "He actually helped me do it, lol. Gave me the papers and everything. Didn't think I'd actually sign them, but I did, face with tears of joy, 100 points." I screenshot that immediately. Exhibit B, voluntary acknowledgement of informed consent. The kid had just publicly confirmed that I hadn't coerced him, hadn't forced him, had actually provided him with documentation that he willingly signed. Any future argument about not understanding what he was signing? Dead on arrival. He'd told the internet he knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. The post had been shared to Twitter, TikTok, and apparently some Reddit forum about toxic parenting, where complete strangers were dissecting my relationship with my son based on nothing but his Instagram caption. I found a whole thread where people were psychoanalyzing me, diagnosing me with narcissistic personality disorder, and recommending books about recovering from parental abuse. One person wrote a detailed comment about how controlling parents use inheritance as leverage and how brave Miles was for choosing authenticity over money. If only they knew that Miles hadn't chosen anything over money. He just didn't know he was choosing poverty until it was too late. I wanted to comment, God, I wanted to create a fake account and just write, fun fact, the loser dad built a $47 million trust fund that you just signed away, but sure, enjoy your new name and your student loans. But I didn't. That would be petty, and more importantly, it would be premature. Let him have his moment. Let him enjoy his internet validation and his 1,200 likes and his comments from strangers who would forget his name by tomorrow. Let Trevor bask in his LinkedIn engagement from fellow entrepreneurs who were all probably equally broke. Because here's the thing about internet fame. It's fast and meaningless and disappears the moment something shinier comes along. But legal documents? Those last forever. Trust clauses? Those are permanent. Financial consequences? Those don't care how many followers you have or how many fire emojis people leave on your posts. I finished my bourbon, ordered the sushi, spicy tuna roll, salmon sashimi, and that fancy toro that costs too much but tastes incredible, and settled in to watch my son's social media triumph. He was trending in his own little corner of the internet, getting attention and validation, and probably feeling like he'd made the best decision of his life. Trevor was being celebrated as a mentor and father figure. Clara was being praised for supporting her son's journey. And me? I was being called toxic, controlling, a bad father, a loser. Random people who knew nothing about me or my family were writing essays about what a terrible person I must be. It was almost impressive how confidently they constructed entire narratives from a single Instagram caption. But I wasn't worried. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even particularly bothered. Because in approximately 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how long it took Miles to actually check his bank accounts or try to access his college fund, reality was going to hit him like a freight train made of consequences. And when it did, all those supportive comments from internet strangers weren't going to pay his tuition. All those fire emojis weren't going to fund his lifestyle. All that validation wasn't going to replace the $47 million he'd just signed away for absolutely nothing except Trevor's approval. I raised my glass to my phone screen, to Miles's smug face in that ridiculous self-made tank top. To new beginnings, kid. Hope your likes keep you warm at night, when you're filling out FAFSA forms. The internet had made him a hero. The Caldwell legacy system had made him broke. I knew which one mattered more. A week later, I was sitting in my favorite leather chair, the one that cost more than some people's cars but cradles you like a supportive parent, unlike actual parents who sometimes fail spectacularly, sipping a glass of Macallan 18 and reading a fascinating book about Byzantine architecture. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of evening that makes you grateful for divorce and empty houses and the absence of teenagers who think they know everything. My phone was on silent because I'd learned years ago that nothing good comes from being constantly available, but it kept lighting up on the side table like a distress beacon. I ignored it the first 3 times. By the 4th, I glanced over and saw Marcus Petros's name flashing across the screen with that particular persistence that meant either someone had died or something equally dramatic had occurred. Marcus didn't call after 8 p.m. unless it was serious. The man had boundaries, respected work-life balance, and generally operated like a reasonable human being. So when he called at 8:47 on a Tuesday night, I knew something had happened. I marked my page, because I'm civilized and don't dog-ear books, especially first editions, and answered. Marcus, let me guess. Clara finally read the clause. There was this long exhale on the other end, the kind that sounds like someone has been holding their breath for approximately 6 hours and just remembered that oxygen exists. Harold, he said, and his voice had that quality of someone who'd been dealing with hysterical phone calls and now needed a drink. I just got off a call with Clara. She's hysterical. I smiled into my scotch glass. So she finally consulted an attorney. What tipped her off? Did Miles try to access his trust fund? Apply for that Princeton scholarship? Try to vote on family council business? All of the above, apparently, Marcus said, and I could hear him moving around, probably pacing in his home office the way he does when cases get complicated. She called me screaming, and I mean screaming, Harold, about how you've stolen Miles's inheritance. Used the word theft approximately 47 times. Threatened to sue. Threatened to call the police. Threatened to contact every news outlet in the tri-state area. Then she cried. Then she threatened again. It was a whole performance. And you explained to her that you can't steal something that was voluntarily relinquished through signed legal documentation? I asked, swirling my drink and genuinely enjoying this conversation more than I'd enjoyed anything in weeks. I explained, Marcus confirmed, in great detail, using small words, that her son signed a legally binding waiver that explicitly triggered Clause 17.4 of the Caldwell Family Trust, thereby forfeiting all entitlements, and that this was entirely voluntary, witnessed, and documented. I sent her copies of the signed waiver, the trust documentation, and the severance protocol execution report. All 600 pages of it. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, which was probably cruel, but the image of Clara trying to read 600 pages of legal documentation was too perfect. How'd she take that? She called me a heartless bastard and hung up, Marcus said, but I could hear the smile in his voice. Then she called back 10 minutes later, much calmer, and asked if there was a reversal process. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when Clara, who'd spent the last 3 years telling everyone who'd listened that I was controlling and manipulative, realized that her beloved Trevor had led their son directly into a legal bear trap. And you told her? I told her the truth, Marcus said. That according to the trust documents, reversal of a Clause 17.4 severance requires unanimous approval from the family council, which consists of you, your father, your sister Rebecca, and nephew Ben. All 4 members must vote yes for reinstatement. I took a long sip of scotch, savoring both the burn and the satisfaction. So basically never. Marcus laughed properly now, that lawyer laugh that sounds expensive. Exactly. She asked what the chances were of getting unanimous approval, and I told her that based on my professional assessment, she had a better chance of winning the lottery, getting struck by lightning, and being abducted by aliens on the same day. You didn't actually say that. I absolutely said that. She'd been screaming at me for 40 minutes. Harold. I was done being diplomatic. He paused, and I heard ice clinking in a glass. He was drinking too. Good. She tried a different approach then. Got all sweet and reasonable. Said that Miles was just a confused teenager, that Trevor had manipulated him, that he didn't understand what he was signing. Except he literally posted on Instagram that he knew exactly what he was signing and did it anyway, I pointed out. I have screenshots, time-stamped, archived, saved in multiple locations including cloud storage and a physical hard drive in my safe. I mentioned that, Marcus said. Sent her the screenshots. That's when she started crying again. Real tears this time, I think. Said you were destroying your son's life over a moment of teenage rebellion. I set down my glass, suddenly less amused. I'm not destroying anything, Marcus. I'm enforcing consequences that were clearly outlined in legal documents that have existed for 6 years. Miles made a choice. A public, documented, celebrated choice. He wanted independence from the Caldwell name. He got it. He wanted to be his own man. Perfect. He can be his own man with his own money, which he'll have to earn himself now. I know that. You know that. Even Clara knows that, deep down, though she'll never admit it. Marcus sighed. She asked me to talk to you, to convince you to reconsider. And you said, I said that I'm your attorney, not your therapist or your priest, and that legal matters are separate from family reconciliation. I also reminded her that I couldn't discuss without your permission with her, which you definitely haven't given me. Correct, I confirmed. What else did she say? She wanted to know what it would take. Like, specifically, what would you need to see or hear to even consider bringing this to the family council for a vote? Marcus paused. I told her I honestly didn't know, because you and I haven't discussed it. Have we? We hadn't. Because I hadn't thought that far ahead, or maybe because I deliberately avoided thinking about it. What do you think, counselor? Hypothetically speaking, if your client, who is definitely not vindictive, just consistent, wanted to establish criteria for potential reinstatement, what would be reasonable? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him thinking, probably pulling up the trust documents on his computer. Hypothetically, I'd say you'd want evidence of genuine understanding and remorse. Not just, I'm sorry I got caught, but actual comprehension of what was lost and why it mattered. You'd want time. Can't reverse something this significant after a week. You'd want changed behavior, maybe a demonstrated commitment to family values and legacy. And honestly, Harold, you'd probably want Trevor out of the picture because as long as that guy is in Miles's ear, nothing's going to change. That's not really within my control, I pointed out. No, but you could make it a condition. Miles wants back in the trust? Fine. But he needs to demonstrate that he's making decisions independently, not just following whatever Trevor suggests. Marcus paused. You could also require public acknowledgement. He disowned you publicly, made you look like a villain to his 2,000 Instagram followers. Fair's fair. I considered this, rolling the crystal glass between my palms. You think I'm being cruel. I think you're being exactly who you've always been. Someone who values legacy, respect, and consequences. Is it harsh? Yeah. Is it legal? Absolutely. Is it effective? We'll find out. Marcus took a drink. Clara also asked how Miles is supposed to pay for college now. Student loans exist. Scholarships exist. Work-study programs exist. Part-time jobs exist. Millions of Americans figure it out every year without trust funds. Miles is smart enough when he bothers to apply himself. He'll manage. That's essentially what I told her in more diplomatic terms. She didn't love that answer. I'm sure she didn't. I picked up my book, ready to return to Byzantine architecture and away from family drama. Anything else? She asked if you even still love him. Marcus said quietly. Your son. She asked if you still love him, or if this is just about punishing her through Miles. That hit differently than the rest of the conversation. I set the book back down. What did you say? I said that I'm not qualified to speak to your emotional state, but that from a legal perspective, the trust was structured to protect family legacy, and that enforcement of its clauses isn't personal, it's procedural. He paused. But between us, Harold, just you and me talking as friends, not attorney-client. What's the answer? Do you still love him? I stared at the family portrait on the wall, the one from 2014, where Miles was 12 and still thought I hung the moon. Of course I still love him, Marcus. He's my son. I'll always love him. But love doesn't mean protecting people from their own stupid decisions. Love sometimes means letting them fall so they learn to get back up. He made a choice. He celebrated that choice. He called me a loser on the internet for 1,200 people to see. And now he's learning that choices have consequences. That's very philosophical, Marcus observed. Also very expensive, from Miles's perspective. The most expensive lessons usually are. I finished my scotch. Is Clara going to keep calling you? Probably. I'm billing you for it, by the way. Hazard pay for dealing with your ex-wife's dramatics. Bill me double. You've earned it. I stood up, walked to the window overlooking the garden. Do me a favor, Marcus. Next time she calls, and she will call, tell her that if Miles wants to discuss reinstatement, he can contact me directly. Not through her, not through Trevor, not through lawyers. Him. Directly. Man to man, if he's such a real man now. You want him to call you? I want him to look me in the eye and explain why he deserves a second chance after publicly humiliating me and throwing away 4 generations of legacy on the advice of a motivational speaker with a podcast. I turned back to my chair. Think he'll do it. Marcus laughed. Not a chance. The kid's 17 and terrified of confrontation. He'll avoid you for months. Then I guess we have our answer about whether he's mature enough for reinstatement. I sat back down, picked up my book. Thanks for the update, Marcus. Send me the bill. Will do. And Harold. Yeah. You're cruel, but you're not wrong. For what that's worth. Coming from you. That's almost a compliment. After he hung up, I sat there for a while, not reading, just thinking. Clara was hysterical. Miles was panicking. Reality was setting in. And somewhere in that house, my old house, Trevor was probably trying to explain how this was all part of some larger lesson about manifesting abundance or whatever nonsense he peddles. I poured myself another scotch. This was going to get worse before it got better. But I'd built my entire career on patience and long-term thinking. I could wait. The question was, could Miles? I wasn't actually there to witness the panic at the gates. That would have been too theatrical, too confrontational, and honestly beneath my dignity. But my security system sure as hell was. And thanks to the miracle of modern technology and my perhaps excessive investment in high-definition cameras with cloud backup, I got to watch the whole beautiful disaster unfold from my new downtown loft approximately 45 minutes after it happened. Let me set the scene for you. It was 9:30 on a Saturday morning. That specific time when reasonable people are either sleeping in or having leisurely brunches, not driving across town to ambush their ex-husbands at property they no longer have access to. But Clara has never been accused of being reasonable, especially when she's in full panic mode. My phone pinged with a motion alert from the estate's front gate. The estate I'd moved out of 3 weeks prior, right after executing Clause 17.4, because I believe in strategic relocations, and also because that house had too many memories of a marriage that died slowly and painfully. I was in the middle of my morning espresso, still in my robe, reading the Wall Street Journal like a civilized human being, when I pulled up the security feed on my tablet. And there it was, Clara's white Mercedes SUV, the one I'd paid for, naturally, pulled up to the front gate with Miles in the passenger seat. Both of them looked like they'd dressed in a hurry. Clara was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun that was trying to be fashionably messy, but just looked panicked. Miles had on a hoodie and sweatpants, the universal uniform of teenagers who've just realized they've screwed up catastrophically. I turned up the volume on the tablet to hear the audio feed. Clara was leaning out of her window, jabbing at the intercom button like it had personally offended her. The gate, of course, remained closed, because I'd had all the access codes changed the day after the severance protocol executed. I'm not an idiot. I knew this confrontation was coming eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen at my old house, which showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how thoroughly I'd planned my exit. Harold. Clara's voice crackled through the intercom speaker, shrill and demanding. Harold, I know you're in there. We need to talk. This is important. It's about Miles's future. Silence from the house, obviously, because I wasn't there and hadn't been for weeks. The property was currently listed with a realtor. I was selling it, couldn't stand to look at it anymore. And the only people with access were my real estate agent and the cleaning service that came twice a week to maintain showing condition. Clara pressed the button again, held it down this time. Harold Caldwell, you open this gate right now? We need to discuss this situation like adults. You can't just ignore us. Oh, but I could. And I was. From a comfortable distance, with excellent espresso and zero obligation to engage with their panic. Miles was leaning forward in his seat, staring at the gate like he could will it open through sheer teenage angst. I zoomed in the camera, because yes, I'd invested in PTZ cameras with 40x optical zoom. And yes, that was probably overkill, but moments like this made it worth every penny, and got a clear view of his face. He looked stressed. Good. Clara tried the old gate code. the one that had worked for the entire duration of our marriage. The keypad blinked red. Denied. She tried it again, slower this time, like maybe she'd misremembered. Red light. Denied. I watched her face cycle through confusion, frustration, and then dawning realization that I'd actually changed the codes. That I'd actually locked them out. That this wasn't just a misunderstanding or technical glitch, but a deliberate choice. He changed the code, Miles said, and even through the security camera audio, I could hear the disbelief in his voice. He actually changed the code. Of course he changed the code, Clara snapped, and her voice had that edge it gets when she's about 5 minutes away from a full meltdown. Your father is petty and vindictive and apparently willing to lock out his own son over a disagreement. A disagreement. She called the complete legal severance of our son from the family trust a disagreement. Like we were arguing about where to eat dinner, not the systematic dismantling of Miles's entire financial future. The delusion was almost impressive. Clara laid on the horn, just held it down, letting it blare across the property like that was going to accomplish anything except annoying the neighbors. Mrs. Davenport next door was probably already composing a strongly worded email to the HOA about noise disturbances. The horn echoed off the stone walls of the estate, and I actually laughed out loud in my loft, alone, watching this performance of desperation play out in high definition. After about 30 seconds of honking, which must have felt like an hour to Miles, who I could see physically cringing in the passenger's seat, Clara stopped. She put the car in park, turned off the engine, gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and just sat there, staring at the gate like it might spontaneously open if she looked angry enough. That's when Mrs. Davenport appeared, right on schedule, walking her miniature poodle Toulouse down the sidewalk like she did every Saturday morning at precisely 9:45. Mrs. Davenport is 83 years old, has lived in that neighborhood since 1967, and knows everything about everyone. She also happens to think I'm such a nice young man, because I helped her carry groceries once and didn't talk down to her about technology. She's Team Harold, in other words, which made what happened next even more delicious. Clara, spotting another human being who might have information, practically jumped out of her SUV. She smoothed down her sweater, arranged her face into something approximating a friendly expression, and approached Mrs. Davenport with that fake casual energy of someone pretending this was a totally normal Saturday morning encounter. Oh, hi. Clara's voice went up half an octave into her talking to strangers register. Mrs. Davenport, right? I'm Clara, Harold's. I'm Harold's ex-wife. Is he home? We've been trying to reach him. Mrs. Davenport stopped walking, and Toulouse sniffed suspiciously at Clara's shoes like even the dog knew something was off. The old woman looked at Clara with that particular expression elderly people get when they're about to deliver information they know will cause distress and are kind of enjoying it. Harold? She said, her voice carrying clearly to the security camera. Oh dear, Harold hasn't lived here for weeks now. He moved out. Let me think, must have been 3 weeks ago. Such a shame, really. He was such a good neighbor. I watched Clara's face on the screen. It went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, anger, and finally this kind of desperate denial. Moved? No, that can't be right. This is his house. He's lived here for 15 years. Was his house. Mrs. Davenport corrected gently but firmly. I saw the moving trucks myself. 2 of them. Very professional operation. He was supervising everything personally, made sure they were careful with his antique furniture. Such a gentleman, that man. Miles had gotten out of the car now, was standing on the sidewalk looking like his entire world was tilting sideways. Which, to be fair, it was. Did he say where he was moving to? He asked, and his voice cracked slightly on moving, which would have been touching if he hadn't put himself in this situation. Mrs. Davenport smiled at Miles with grandmotherly sympathy. He didn't mention specifics, just said he needed a fresh start. Can't say I blame him after everything he's been through. She said this last part with a pointed look at Clara, because Mrs. Davenport absolutely knew about the divorce and had opinions about it. Such a shame when families fall apart. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But he has to tell us where he's living. He has a son. You can't just disappear when you have a child. I'm sure you can reach him through his attorney, Mrs. Davenport said primly, and I could tell she was enjoying this way more than she should. That's what my late husband always said. Legal matters should go through proper channels. Now if you'll excuse me, Toulouse needs his walk." She continued down the sidewalk, leaving Clara and Miles standing there in front of the closed gate like visitors to a museum that was permanently closed. Clara turned back to look at the house, my old house, the house she'd kicked me out of during the divorce, the house she'd probably driven past regularly feeling smug about. And I could see the exact moment reality hit her. Miles walked back to the gate, pressed his face against the iron bars like a kid looking into a toy store he couldn't afford. "He's really gone," he said quietly. "He actually left." "Of course he left," Clara said. But her voice was shaky now, the confidence evaporating. "This is what he does. He runs away when things get difficult." Classic Harold behavior. I almost dropped my tablet. Classic Harold behavior? I'd stayed through 15 years of marriage, supported her through 2 failed business ventures, tolerated her yoga instructor affair for 6 months before she finally admitted it, and paid for everything including the therapy she claimed would save our marriage, but actually just convinced her she deserved better. But sure, I was the one who ran away when things got difficult. They stood there for another few minutes, Clara making phone calls that clearly weren't being answered. Probably trying my cell, which I'd temporarily routed to voicemail for exactly this reason, while Miles just stared at the house like it might give him answers. Finally, mercifully, Clara got back in the SUV. Miles followed, moving like someone in a dream or maybe a nightmare. As they drove away, I rewound the footage and watched it again, because I'm petty and it was incredibly satisfying. The confusion when the code didn't work. The desperation in Clara's voice. Mrs. Davenport's perfectly delivered revelation. Miles's face when he realized I'd actually left. It was better than anything I could have planned if I'd been there in person. I made myself another espresso, pulled up my phone, and sent a text to Marcus. They tried to visit the old house this morning. Security footage is archived and saved. Clara looked appropriately panicked. His response came 30 seconds later. "You're actually enjoying this, aren't you?" I typed back. "I'm enjoying my coffee. The panic is just a pleasant bonus." Because that's the thing about consequences. They're not about revenge or cruelty or punishment. They're about clarity. Clara and Miles had spent weeks operating under the assumption that this was temporary, that I was bluffing, that eventually I'd cave and restore everything, because that's what fathers do, right? They forgive. They relent. They put their kids' needs above their own hurt. But I wasn't forgiving yet. I wasn't relenting. And my son's needs, his actual needs, not his wants, included learning that actions have permanent consequences, that legacy isn't something you can discard and then reclaim when it's convenient, and that some decisions can't be undone with an apology and a sad face. They'd come to the gate expecting confrontation or negotiation. Instead, they got an empty house and an elderly woman with a poodle delivering the news that I'd moved on. Literally, physically relocated my entire life away from them. That message was clearer than anything I could have said in person. You wanted independence from me? You got it. Welcome to what that actually means. 3 weeks later, my nephew Ben decided to get engaged, which meant the Caldwell family was gathering for one of those rooftop soirees that cost more than most people's weddings. String lights, champagne fountains, a jazz quartet playing in the corner, the whole 9 yards of upper-class celebration. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best suit, ready to toast young love and watch my son squirm. Miles showed up even later, around 8:30, wearing sneakers with his dress pants like he was making some kind of statement about nonconformity. Clara and Trevor weren't with him. Interesting. He'd come alone, probably thinking he could blend into the crowd, grab some free food, and avoid the family members who'd definitely heard about his little name change adventure. He was wrong about that blending in thing. I watched from across the rooftop as he made awkward small talk with cousin Sarah, who kept glancing at him like he was a fascinating zoo exhibit. Then a man in a gray suit, one of Marcus's associates, perfectly timed, approached Miles with a manila envelope. Official looking. Ominous. "Miles Caldwell?" the man asked, loud enough that nearby conversation stopped. It's Hartwell now," Miles stammered. The man smiled thinly. "Not according to these documents." He handed over the envelope and walked away. Miles opened it right there, hands shaking slightly. I'd had Marcus prepare the contents personally. A copy of the signed waiver, a detailed list of every single thing he'd lost, properties, funds, scholarships, all itemized with dollar amounts. And at the bottom, my handwritten note on Caldwell family letterhead. "Blood matters. But names carry the weight. You gave yours away. The rooftop went silent. Even the jazz quartet seemed to pause mid-song. Ben's fiancée froze with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Cousin Sarah's eyes went wide. And then my father, Miles's grandfather, the family patriarch, stood up from his table, looked directly at Miles with an expression of profound disappointment, and walked out without saying a single word. No yelling, no scene, just silence and the sound of expensive shoes on tile as the old man left his own grandson standing there holding proof of his stupidity. Other family members started looking away, suddenly very interested in their drinks or the view or literally anything except the teenager who'd just been publicly reminded of his catastrophic mistake. Miles stood there, envelope trembling in his hands, face going red, and I could see the exact moment he realized something crucial. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. He wasn't being punished. He was being erased from the family legacy he'd rejected. And everyone here knew it. Losing a name hits different than losing money. Money disappears all at once. One day it's there, the next it's gone. But a name? That erodes slowly, like watching a coastline crumble into the ocean one grain of sand at a time. First, people just stopped replying to Miles's texts. Family group chats went quiet when he posted. Cousin Ben's replies got shorter, more polite, more distant. Then the invitations dried up. Birthday parties he used to be automatically included in, family dinners, holiday gatherings. His phone got quieter each week. The family scholarship he'd been counting on for college? Revoked, with a formal letter explaining that only Caldwell descendants in good standing qualified. His cushy internship at Cousin Ben's startup, the one that was supposed to pad his resume? Gone. Ben sent a brief email. We're restructuring. Thanks for your interest. Even his birthday that year was different. Quiet. A text from Clara, a card from Trevor with a Starbucks gift card inside. That was it. No family dinner, no gathering, no grandfather calling with stock tips and life advice. Trevor stopped calling him buddy. Started calling him man, in that distant way you talk to acquaintances you're not particularly invested in. Good luck with that, man. Hope it works out, man. The mentorship had apparently expired along with the trust fund. Finally, 6 weeks after the engagement party, Miles texted me, Dad, I'm sorry. Can we talk? I read it 3 times. Didn't respond. Not because I was cruel, but because silence teaches longer lessons than lectures ever could. He found me 2 weeks later at Ashton Botanical Garden, trimming roses in the early morning sun. Peaceful, quiet, no drama, just pruning shears and the smell of fresh earth. Miles approached slowly, like I might bolt. Dad, I didn't mean it. It was just a stupid moment. I snipped a branch clean, examined the cut. And that's the thing, Miles. Stupid moments can cost entire futures. I moved to the next bush, not looking at him. You wanted to make a statement. You made it. Loudly. Publicly. With hashtags. Can I change it back? His voice cracked. The name. Everything. I finally looked at him. Really looked. He'd lost weight. Had circles under his eyes. Looked older somehow. You can change your name on paper, son. File the forms, pay the fees. But you can't erase the